Dodge this.
And now, welcome to another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. Here's your host from federaljack.com. It's Popeye.
I know you're out there. I can feel you now. I know that you're afraid. You're afraid of us. You're afraid of change. I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it's going to begin. I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see. I'm going to show them a world without you. A world without rules and controls, without borders or boundaries. A world where anything is possible. Where we go from there is a choice I leave to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for another edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. I am your host, Popeye. On this edition of DTRH, I'm going to be playing my interview that I did with Jay Dyer, author, researcher, comedian, all-around interesting individual. We had an extraordinary interview back in December, the beginning of December of 2016. As you all know, I've been on hiatus for a while. Now that I have the YouTube channel fixed, that was part of the problem. The YouTube channel was under attack by YouTube for a while, and first I wasn't able to upload, and then I got that back, and then I had to fix a ton of my videos, a couple hundred of them, because they were all muted. Archives of shows because of my intro. Hence why this intro is a little bit different. But I'm keeping the audio intro as is intact in full. If you download the audio archive, if you just want the audio, and you go to popeyeradio.com, you can download the audio from the show without any video. And it has the full intro in it. I know some people don't like the intro, so I guess the YouTube version's better for you. But if you're, a hardcore fan, and if you appreciate the intro and the reason why it's there, and the message and the tone that it sets for the rest of the show, and that's what you like, and, I like it, I'm still going to be using it. Even though YouTube hits it with copyright strikes out the yin-yang, and hence why the videos are muted in all countries and banned. It was just ridiculous. I threw a screen capture video I did a couple months ago up of it. And it took me a while to fix all this stuff. Because, of course, you go in and you want to fix it all in like one day. And you have a certain amount that you're allowed to fix. And then they cut you off. It's ridiculous. And I know everybody that's been paying attention to the alternative media right now knows what I'm talking about. Or whatever it's called. I shouldn't call it the alternative media. Because I guess that's got kind of negative connotations to it now. Whatever. This thing that we do. YouTube's been attacking channels, although I see everybody really complaining about demonetization. Well, I've always said don't monetize your channel and it won't be a problem. Don't make income coming into your channel how you fund things. You have to figure out other ways to do it. I've never monetized any of my channels. I've been doing this 10 years, at least. What is it, 2017? It's going on 11 years now. So I've never monetized any of my channels because that would be the first thing that they would take away from us back in the day if we even tried. They wouldn't even let us do it to begin with. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't do it. So it doesn't matter. There's no point in it. It's not why I do this. I don't do this for money. Anyway, so I see that's how they're attacking the people now, is they're going after the ads. Even though Google didn't have a problem making money off of AdSense for all those years before, and now suddenly their sponsors are pissed off because they don't want their message appearing next to certain videos. And I can understand if it was like some sort of terrorism related video where they're literally chopping someone's head off, but I mean, some of the videos that they're going after, the YouTube channels they're going after, obviously it's for the content, whether it's their politics or whatever they talk about, even if it's not political. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And by the way, why would YouTube even allow the terrorist videos to be on there? They'll take down one of my videos or mute one of my videos for 30 seconds of audio inside of an intro to my radio show and now podcast, and yet a terrorist video with like like a training video and propaganda and recruitment and all this stuff that can stay on there. Oh well, it slips past our censors. How it's all algorithms. How does it slip past your censors? If you type in block videos exposing the Council on Foreign Relations, or block all videos with the hashtag CFR in it, or not even a hashtag, just the tag on the video, CFR, boom. I mean, they can do that at YouTube. We've been talking about the algorithms doing this for like 10 years. I remember back when I first started talking about this, years and years and years ago. I'm going to have to go dig the videos out and just make a little side segment, cut it out, and put it up with the older videos from years ago where I was talking about YouTube doing this, and people thought I was crazy. Oh, there's no way they're blocking things. There's nobody sitting at Google pressing a button. No, it's a computer. You really think it's just one individual? And maybe back in the day it was one or two people or somebody here or there clicking a mouse. Click, done. Not anymore. It's all algorithms. So they can block you, as I said, you're looking for like CFR. They can block that. Not a problem. So anyway, stay tuned for new videos, previously unreleased interviews, and a bunch of archives from when I was doing live radio that I haven't gotten a chance to get rendered and put up in video format on YouTube. And whenever a new video pops up on YouTube, the accompanying audio will be available over at popeyeradio.com for free to download. So if you see something pop up on YouTube, the audio will always be available. As soon as it's available on YouTube, the audio will always be available for download over at popeyeradio.com. Just remember that. With that in mind, let's get to the main event. Here's my interview with author and researcher Jay Dyer. Check his book out, Esoteric Hollywood, and go check his work out over at jaysanalysis.com. First and foremost, Jay, let me welcome you to Down the Rabbit Hole. As I said to you earlier, you do amazing analysis on
Thank you.
On movies and politics and the esoteric and the hidden dark occult, because that's really what you see going on, and that's what you're able to pull out. Like I said, you have this vast amount of knowledge about politics and occult knowledge. You have understanding of the powers that shouldn't be themselves, and ritual, and modern day, just what's going on in the world, and you're able to take all of this and create this amazing analysis. And as I said earlier, I truly appreciate your work. And I know if I truly appreciate your work, that means that my listeners will truly appreciate it, because they consider my show kind of like a college course. So, and I consider your work college level work. It's not basic stuff. Your stuff is very in depth. So I want to say right off the bat, big thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, you need to get Jay's book. I'm just going to shamelessly plug his book before we even get into it. You'll see why as we go through this interview and you hear what he has to say. But just go get his book, Esoteric Hollywood. Where can they buy it? Before we even get sidetracked into anything else, I know you're selling it directly off your site, right? That's like the best place for people to go?
Yeah, the best way to get it, if you want a signed copy, is to just message me through the blog. My email's there, or Facebook or Twitter, and we can set up how to send you a copy, and that's best for inside the U.S. Actually, if you're outside the U.S., it's going to be a little bit pricier for shipping, but you can get it through Amazon, probably in some other country. Although unfortunately, it's apparently sold out in Amazon UK warehouse. So if you're in the UK, you can't get it from Amazon, unfortunately, but you can get it from me. But it is a little bit pricier. So, yeah, people should just message me personally.
And you do autographed copies, right?
Yeah, that's the bonus. It's signed by me, and then it's $30 a copy, which just basically covers the shipping. So normal price is $22 with tax. So
with tax and shipping, and basically you're getting an autograph copy, it's no special really price for the autograph. Your shipping's included. Ladies and gentlemen, $30. It's worth it. Trust me. I'm going to tell you, and the listeners already know this, I don't promote books unless I believe in the work, and I I know that it's actual factual and it's intellectual and it's accurate. And I don't come on here, I don't get paid by anybody to promote anybody's books. So I would urge the listeners to get Jay's book. Jay's book is awesome, and I've only been able to skim through so far. I haven't gotten a chance to actually get down into the nitty-gritty. And just from what I've skimmed through, my mind is blown already. I already know it's melted. And just from knowing Jay's videos and Jay's work, I know the book's going to melt my mind. And I know it'll melt yours too, ladies and gentlemen. So get the book. So getting into it. Jay, before we get into the depth of Kubrick's work, or not so much his work, but you analyzing his movies or Spielberg stuff, which blew me away. I'm so glad you covered Spielberg. Nobody talks about Spielberg, and there's so much weird crap in his films. But besides that, okay, let's start off. I got to ask you the obligatory question of what made you get into writing about this and taking the time to actually learn this stuff, because this takes hundreds of hours of research to actually get involved and know what's actually going on.
It's just whatever my CIA handlers told me to write. I'm joking.
That's awesome.
No, I was just kind of an eccentric dude. I always liked books. My mom was a librarian, so I grew up around books, and then always had a flair for the arts and acting and comedy and improv and all that. I did a lot of that in high school, and so by the time I was doing college, I was interested in philosophy and comparative religion, and I decided I didn't really want to pursue doing stand-up. That's actually what I was doing early on, and I'd written a whole routine and was doing it improv and amateur night and stuff when I was like 18. And it's not that I was like some failure or something. I just decided that I would like to, get a college education, and so I chose philosophy because it was just the most interesting subject matter to me at the time. Still very interesting, to this day. And then when you go to college, you get exposed to all kinds of things. And I stumbled. That was around the time that the internet was getting popular, so I started reading, conspiracy-related topics. And I remember seeing Alex Jones and Bohemian Grove and all that right around 2003 or 4. And that kind of put me on a track of, looking deeper into secret societies and, that kind of espionage-related stuff. And by the time that I finished my undergrad and started grad school, it really just tied in well with a lot of the subject matter that I was into by my mid to late 20s. So around that time, I started thinking, why not try writing? Because if you do college philosophy and grad, you're forced to write hundreds of pages of papers, over the whole 6-year period, like if you go for a master's or something. So I'd written all these papers, and I was like, what's the point of writing all these papers? I might as well just try to put them out there and see what happens, see if I get any reaction or feedback. And, when you're in college, you do have the benefit, the advantage of being exposed to a lot of different ideas. That's one of the pros. I'm not a big fan of the state school system, of course, but one of the pros is that it does force you to interact with a bunch of new ideas that you never would have probably come in contact with otherwise, like the Frankfurt School or something like this. Like I never would have studied that, or very obscure, weird philosophers, many of whom I totally disagree with. But being forced to read them and understand them, I think was a very valuable thing in the process of my education. And one of the great things that philosophy forces you to do is to consider other positions that you may not agree with and try to be as objective as possible. And I think that overall helped me to be better fitted for analytical approaches to things like the arts even. And so I know oftentimes we think of the arts being, right brain or something, and opposed to analyzing or analytics, and that's something like left brain, like mathematics. But I don't really, both hemispheres of the brains are going to be involved in any kinds of activities, whether they're the arts or whether it's something more logical or mathematical. So I've always been interested in the bridging between those two hemispheres, and I think that what I tried to do with my book was basically just collect together out of the last 8 or 10 years of blogging and writing and doing college papers and so forth, what I thought, really encapsulated, well, it's multiple things, right? So it's like, what are the coolest analyses I did on the one hand? What are the ones that are, like the most read? Which ones really stand out as important directors or films that made an impact, for good or for ill? And which ones were the most propagandist and so forth. So there's a whole bunch of different reasons, why I chose the ones I chose. I was also kind of limited on space, so there's a lot of analyses I wanted to be in there that I didn't put in there. And then I chose to make some of them kind of goofy, because you can't have a book like this be totally serious. The whole thing be totally serious. It would just be too dark and grim. So there's got to be some lighthearted, satire and so forth. So anyway, I'm rambling, but the whole point was just to say that it's just, it's a reflection of stuff that I've read about and looked into over the last, since I was 18 or so.
As you look deeper into this information about the, let's say the occult aspect of things, the dark occult, do you find that the information is put out there about the dark occult, not some of the disinfo, but the real info about some of the horrible dark things that are going on in your research? Do you find it to be true?
Well, I guess it depends on a case-by-case basis, but there are plenty of books that I think have made a substantial case for the realities of things like ritual abuse or mind control. I mean, those things are very real. MK Ultra was real. There's plenty of books that deal with ritual abuse, like in the context of the Catholic Church, William Kennedy's book, Lucifer's Lodge, Craig Heimbichner's book on Crowley. There's plenty of books that deal with these topics that I don't think you could just brush aside as sensationalism or fanaticism or something like that. So, yes, I do think that there are examples of that, but what my book does is really just take each film. It's not even an analysis of the directors and their lives. It's just an analysis of each film and, looking at it and saying, what is the director trying to say with this piece of art or this piece of propaganda, or, depending on what it might be. And sometimes it's a little bit of both. And I think, films like Eyes Wide Shut definitely show, in my mind, that Kubrick is telling us something about what goes on in the real world. So I would say, yeah, there certainly is truth to those things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that every claim is legit, or every person, who claims to be like a MK Ultra sex kitty slave really is, or anything like that. I mean, it just depends. You can't make any kind of blanket, assessments in these kinds of things. I mean, from time immemorial, you've had, these kinds of practices going on, particularly in the state. You go all the way back to ancient cultures, and they were practicing human sacrifice. They were engaged in all kinds of ritual actions like this. And, this is, some people think that, that's kind of made up by scholars. I don't think so. I tend to think that is how cultures operated. So therefore, it's probably still going on today.
Now, see, I'm glad you framed it that way and you set it up that way, because that's exactly why I wanted to talk about this for a few minutes before we got into the analysis of the movies, because you're going to be talking about, some occult messages or perhaps political propaganda and all of that, and the listeners already know this, but all of that is in there on purpose for a reason, because it's all connected. And it's important that we kind of set the stage a little bit and let people understand, or help them understand a little better, of the weirdness that is actually going on. Some of the darker things that they hear about, this thing with this Pizzagate thing, this stuff that came out of the Podesta emails that eventually got turned into a psyop, and they ended up narrowing everybody's focus down to a pizza shop instead of paying attention how institutional that this pedophilia and Satanism really is. I mean, I think that whole thing's a psyop, and I think everybody's attention's being focused. It's a straw man. To me, the pizzeria is a straw man, and they're getting people to focus away from the real issue, which is Podesta isn't in charge of some ring. He's just part of some huge scumbag, pedophile, satanic, disgusting human trafficking ring.
and it's prolific and it's worldwide. I mean, there's Jimmy Savile's involved in it, the royal family, people all the way over here, politicians. You have Bush and Reagan back in the 80s. You know, the Franklin cover-up. There's so much stuff out there that, like a pizza shop, no, that's not the focus of the attention. So I see that as a psyop. I am glad that people are paying attention to it. Unfortunately, the research doesn't seem to go as deep as it should. But with all of this stuff out there right now in the general public's mind and being conversated about and being talked about, people are actually going and they're doing some research into this, and they're going to find videos where people are just talking about stuff where my biggest pet peeve is they do 2% of research. They skim the top 2% of things, think they're an expert, and suddenly they're on YouTube and they have a blog. I didn't dare go near YouTube or start publishing stories about any of this stuff until I had a couple years of research under my belt before I even opened my mouth, because I wanted to make sure I knew what I was talking about and wasn't giving people improper information. And you don't see that anymore. And I think that's how that psyop of creating that straw man becomes so useful to the powers that shouldn't be, because they've studied the alternative media and they kind of understand how they work to a degree. I mean, they do study us, they do pay attention. So my way of fighting some of that is, since that is all out in the public consciousness right now, it's actually really kind of good to a degree, because we can do a broadcast like this where it's filled with information, and you can point out, look, you're all paying attention to this weird esoteric occult stuff, right? Well, hold on, put that on hold for a second. Let me show you some of this symbology in these movies, and you tell me why. You know, ask yourself, why is that there? Right now, we can grab their attention.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, all these topics, all these subjects are very complicated and complex. That's how life is. So we can't boil any instance down to a super simple, oh, this is what it is for sure, you know, based on what might be circumstantial evidence. So I've said pretty much the same thing the entire time about the Pizzagate thing, is that, okay, so you've got all these WikiLeaks emails, which not many people are asking the question of, well, who's behind WikiLeaks and why is it timed to be at this time? You know, is this a limited hangout? That does not mean that everything that's in the emails is fake. It just means that multiple levels of a game can be played. So I would say that the emails are real, but what are they talking about? Is it drugs? Is it trafficking? It's probably intentionally unclear in terms of 100%. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of indicators that are very bizarre, very, very questionable, but you know, I think when this started breaking, we were told, the hard proof is going to be on some laptop that Anthony Weiner had that's supposed to be connected to Epstein and the Little St. James, Lolita Express Island and all this. And, you know, nobody's ever going to see that information if that's real. So we're probably not going to know about that. Well, I mean, who's going to investigate these people? I mean, it would have to be presumably Trump, you know, appointing some prosecutor or something. I mean, there's no other way that we're going to have a specific case in this regard unless people come out, you know, and give statements to police or something like that. But maybe the police in D.C. are too corrupt. I don't know. I mean, I've only been to D.C. like a couple times, very briefly in my life, so I don't really know what it's like there, other than, you know, it's obviously pretty corrupt at the governmental level. There's no question about that. But I mean, yeah, this stuff is pretty standard fare, I think, when it comes to high-level government as a blackmail operation. I'm just speaking generally about these kinds of sex espionage operations, which is my guess what would be going on. And we've seen hints of that with Deborah Palfrey and Henry Vincent and these different people that have come forth and, you know, written books and talked about how the political blackmail happens and all that. But, you know, you can't just say for certain based on YouTube videos or this or that there's 100% proof. You know, I mean, again, it just depends. I kind of liken it to 9/11. I mean, it's not always clear when something is circumstantial either. I mean, in other words, say PNAC, right? The PNAC document, is that proof? Well, maybe. I mean, is PNAC enough to convict anybody? Maybe in a better functioning society, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. No neocons are going to be convicted for PNAC. So, it's kind of like a bigger narrative. So I agree with you that you kind of have to step back and look at patterns of, you go back to Savile was doing this for a long time. You've got these other UK MPs that were involved in this stuff. Cyril Smith, right, that it only seems to come out about them after they're dead. You've got this going on, reports about Australian government. You've got the stories of the Finders. You've got the stories of Franklin cover-up. You've got all these stories about this that are in the news. You've got the Roman Catholic abuse, Boys Town. So it's not like there's no precedent for it, but just because there's precedent in these other cases, it's just not, you can't just pick a symbol and a code word, right, and say, well, that proves it, or that the Instagram photos, which are many of them pretty gross, but, can you say for certain that means that they were sacrificing kids? No. But does that mean I don't know. There's just no way for us who are out here looking at this through the medium of the internet or something, to know for certain. And that's the whole point of why we have, at least the facade of a justice system with, people giving testimony and there being a jury of peers and all that. So, it's pretty complicated, but I don't think that, there's definitely a lot of bizarre issues around this, a lot of weird questions, a lot of things that don't make sense, with what's in the WikiLeaks, the way they're using these strange terms. Is it just like is it drugs? Is it sex? Is it maybe just prostitution? Is it gay prostitution maybe? Who knows? Are they really into bondage and sadomasochism? Who knows? Do you know? I don't know.
Right. You're right. You really don't know. And we know that these guys are videotaped. Like, the Epstein's rooms were supposedly wired for sound and video. It's been said the same thing about Bohemian Grove, the cabins there, that they're wired. So, these places, they have multiple uses. They can have events there where they have meetings and discuss policy and things. And at the same time, when they get up to their, whatever dirty deeds they're doing behind the scenes, and whatever they're doing, if they're not hurting somebody else, if they were just, with male prostitutes, it's really none of my business. If they're hurting children, that's a complete different story. It's two different things. And unfortunately, these guys, and this is just the research that, like, if you go do the research, you'll see for yourself. I'm not trying to feed you anything. I really urge people to wholeheartedly try to disprove me or Jay and go do the research yourself. And unfortunately, you'll come to the same conclusion because that's what you're going to see, the evidence right in front of your face. But these people have this proclivity for hurting children, and it's absolutely disgusting. And there's a bazillion different reasons why. I don't think you really need a reason why they're doing it. If you want to just look, you can. And there are reasons why they do it, and I've talked about that in many different shows. I don't need to go into detail here. The point is, it's abhorrent behavior, and it is real. And in fact, a lot of this is, some of this is like hidden in symbolism in these movies that you've talked about in your book, and you've brought this up. And I'm gonna pick your brain about Spielberg, but first we have to go proper order, and we should talk, if we're going to talk about the book and movie analysis and the occult and all this and politics, I should ask you first about Kubrick and your thoughts, because I know there's different thoughts about Kubrick and what he was trying to hide in specific films here or there. I know I have my own thoughts on it. I do think he was trying to at least put it out there. Whether or not he was doing it for a good or bad reason, I don't know, but I think that there's definitely a message in his films, this overall message of this dark pedophile network. Like it's almost like he was trying to tell us that it was there. I don't know if it was for a good reason or a bad reason. I don't know his reasoning, but I know that there's more than enough information in these films that you're like, wow, And I know that kind of gets into Spielberg a little bit too. I know they're kind of meshed with. I think AI was originally his, and then after he died, Spielberg got it. So, but first, let's get into Kubrick. So, your thoughts on Kubrick?
Well, I chose the first analysis to be Eyes Wide Shut, and I mean, I'm sure everybody's pretty familiar with that film to the extent that I don't need to rehearse all the details. But what I did was focus on the more esoteric and religious symbology of this film. And while there are hints at, mind control or human trafficking, things like this, I do bring those up in terms that I think relate to the film. But what I focus on is just simply the symbolism. And why do we have these references to the magic circle so often in the film? Why do we have these references to over the rainbow, or why do we have masks that come up so often? And I don't just keep it at the level of mere occult speculation or something like that. I also look at philosophy. I look at how does existential philosophy understand the mask? And somebody like Jean-Paul Sartre, the famous existentialist, he sees the mask as something that we all wear. And I think that but kind of hiding behind what he would say is hypocrisy. Now, I'm not a big fan of Sartre, but I think that he might have an insight there that's relevant to the film, and so I consider the possibility that Kubrick might be making an existentialist statement with the mask symbology, and particularly how many masks are in Domino's apartment, who is the hooker, who's kind of the sex swallow espionage girl who baits Bill Harford into being led further down this garden path of what I believe is kind of an initiation ritual for him. So for him to undergo induction into this cult, he has to be shown the power and the extent of the cult's power. And the way that they do that is through arranging a lot of these operations in his life.
I find it interesting that the usage of the character name Domino, by the way, I just wanted to point this out.
Right.
Because that's also a name of a character in James Bond film lore. Mm-hmm. And you talk about the Bond films in your book, too, which we'll get to later. Anyway, I just thought it was interesting to point that out when you brought the name up. It just, bing. I told you, talking to you and just, going through your work and watching your videos, you make light bulbs pop off in my head constantly, Jay. So, thanks,
man. I mean, I don't mention Domino in particular in relationship to Bond. I don't think, but there is a whole chapter that deals with 007 and the reboots. I think there's about 50 or 60 pages on 007. So I do go into a lot of depth on that topic, and I do discuss some of the meaning of the names. And for example, in Quantum of Solace, you have Mr. Green, and while that's not everybody's favorite reboot, Mr. Green is kind of this Al Gore, Ted Turner type character who runs this giant sort of billionaire global radical environmental movement. And what it is it's kind of this front for controlling natural resources and bankrupting certain countries, whole like Latin American nations, and then getting them through a puppet dictator to sign over the natural resources to some private entity. And then Mr. Green's institution, under the guise of environmental laws, has complete control, monopoly control of resources, in this case, water. So that Bond film, actually, which is of the Daniel Craig reboots, is probably everybody's least favorite, is arguably the most insightful in terms of, real-world geopolitics and skullduggery. And so, yes, I mean, there's a lot of different ways. So, like the bad guy, who's the bad guy in, say, Casino Royale, Le Chiffre. Well, in French, that means the cipher. And Le Chiffre is based on Crowley, according to Bond scholars. And there is an actual discipline called Bond scholarship, Bondology. And most of them are agreed that Le Chiffre is in some rough sense based on Crowley, because Ian Fleming, who's the author of the Bond stories, had some knowledge or association with Crowley. I don't know that there's any proof that he directly met with him, but Crowley did for a time work as a kind of asset for MI5 or British intelligence, and another MI5 person who did meet with Crowley was Dennis Wheatley, and Dennis Wheatley also wrote sort of esoteric spy novels, occult novels, and he's of course famous for the creation of the character the Duc de Richelieu, played by Christopher Lee, who is always solving occult crimes, and the basis for Dennis Wheatley's novels, The Devil Rides Out, and then of course the film Devil Rides Out, was his conversations with Crowley.
And interestingly enough, Christopher Lee, he was one of the bad guys in the Star Wars films. But interestingly enough, I know he just died recently, and he was into the occult himself. He was personally into the occult, and to what level I don't know, but I know that there was an article about it after his death. That was
I actually posted a couple interviews where he talks about it, I think in one of my articles. And what's weird is that he seems to say two different things. There's an old clip of him saying that he received an autographed copy of the Satanic Bible from Anton LaVey. And then there's an interview with him right before he died saying, please don't ever have anything to do with the occult. A lot of people have asked me this over the years, and he says I have nothing to do with it. So a little bit of obfuscation, and it's a little unclear. Maybe he dabbled for a time or something like this. But other weird things, too, pop up about Christopher Lee, which I mentioned here and there in the book. Like there's tales that he was in some way himself a secret agent and might have even been involved in special operations or perhaps assassinations. And then you have other British publications, I think the Telegraph, trying to debunk this, saying that he basically had no role. So, who knows? We'll probably never know unless you're, from Christopher Lee's family or something, what the real story was. I don't know. But yeah, you get all kinds of stories like this of, a lot of actors who did have a time period where they worked in espionage, or they were, recruited into spying or something like this. And that's not the total focus of my book, but I do bring that up often just because it's, a good example of that bridge between fiction and reality, which is the subject of my book.
Well, I mean, think about it. If you're an agent, right, and you're trying to sell an idea, who better to have do it than a actor or actress whose profession is pretending to be someone or something that they're not, which is what these people do and what the intelligence agencies do. And the intelligence agencies really just spawned out of these elitist families where a lot of these intelligence agencies, you can trace that stuff back hundreds of years to, it'd be the same thing as if a royal family had, the royal families of old and these black nobility families, they had the same thing. They just didn't call it the CIA, but they had their own trusted group of spies, so to speak.
Spying is the second oldest profession after prostitution, supposedly, as the dictum goes.
This is nothing new. Like the expression is, there's nothing new under the sun, right? Mm-hmm. So, getting back to Kubrick, because I know I kind of took us a little bit off there, but I thought you, like I said, you make me, as we're talking, you're making, I can see things, and I already know, knowing already the level of information that I do, talking to someone like you that has that same level of information, it's like bing, 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 all these light bulbs pop off. So I appreciate your time, Jay.
I like to kind of go off into different topics so that we don't have the same interview every time that I discuss the book, and that's just, to avoid monotony. And, if we talk about spying and prostitution, and in fact, sometimes those two things go together, right? So we mentioned Domino earlier. Well, Hitchcock was actually making movies in the 40s and 50s where he was showing that intelligence agencies utilize sex operatives, even back then. And so when we hear this sort of conspiracy trope, kind of going around that, there's these beta sex kittens or this or that. Well, it may not be true in every instance of every pop star, but it's also possible because that is a technique that intelligence agencies and governments have used, again, from time from primal times. I mean, look at Hitchcock's Notorious, where you've got Cary Grant playing basically this OSS character who is a male swallow. He lures Ingrid Bergman's character into doing his bidding, and they're trying to out this Nazi spy guy based on, they know that she'll be a key fixture in the bad guy's operation, because he has a thing for her. So they sort of arrange her to marry this guy, and it's kind of all this big setup to bring down his Nazi operation. So that's Hitchcock's Notorious, and nobody really knew about the OSS at that time, but Cary Grant is playing that type of a character, right? This is pre-CIA. And then in North by Northwest, which I have a section on in the book, you've got Eva St. Marie playing the blonde sex operative who is also at that time working for the CIA, and specifically in the movie mentioned to be the CIA. And who runs the CIA? Well, it's a bunch of professors and academics in Washington, and they arrange this operation that actually goes awry. And of course, Cary Grant's character gets roped into this accidentally, this sort of the fool archetype, where he stumbles into this big operation, and on the case of mistaken identity, he's wrapped up in this. And you've got other Hitchcock films that deal with curious subjects, possibly even human trafficking, and The Man Who Knew Too Much with Jimmy Stewart, where his son gets kidnapped by some ring, I think, while they're in Turkey, if I recall. So this is, again, movies are telling us something about how the real world works. And you can even go back to a lot of these older movies that might have been forgotten or overlooked, right? I mean, who thinks about, MK Ultra in relationship to North by Northwest or something? Well, I do, because I think there's evidence that or maybe even Vertigo, maybe even Hitchcock's Vertigo, or think about Marnie, right? How many times in Hitchcock movies there you've got Tippi Hedren having multiple personalities. And so if you look at Strangers on a Train, another Hitchcock movie with double alternate personalities. Think about Psycho, right? I mean, he's basically got his mom's personality as half of his mind or something. This is a common theme, and I don't think that it's accidental that Hitchcock's works were studied for their effect. You have what's called the Korda Circle with Sir Alexander Korda, who was, I think, the first knighted British filmmaker. And he was brought over to the U.S. and kind of helped some of the MGM people early on. So there's been this really strange association between Disney and MGM and Paramount and the OSS and these British intelligence people like Ian Fleming and Noel Coward and other operatives like this, and Bill Donovan, all kind of hanging out, where you see one of the most clear examples, I would say, of the parallels between Hollywood and intelligence, and the London variants, right? London theater and British intelligence.
Well, opinions, and I mean society's opinions, and society is made up of everybody, so that includes those of you who are listening. Think about an opinion you may have on a subject and ask yourself if it's truly your opinion, or if it's an opinion that was formulated for you, and where did it come from? And then you start to study this, you realize there's this marriage between the intelligence community and Hollywood. And the same thing with the news agencies too, Jay. The same exact thing.
Oh, yeah. I argue that news, quote unquote, is really just kind of an extension of Hollywood in many ways.
Who owns ABC? Disney.
Disney, yeah.
So the same people that brought you Pirates of the Caribbean are bringing you nightly news. End of story.
Yeah, and Fox News is classed under entertainment. So even, I think back in 2012, whoever wrote that kind of viral article about media control, but as of 2012, there were 6 corporations that owned like 90 or 95% of the media.
Yeah, so you're not really getting true content, and they all have entertainment ties. So someone that's bringing you Disney or something to that effect, if they're bringing you CGI entertainment, then they're lying to you. They're the same people. You can't get. I won't trust a news source that comes from somebody that brought me Pirates of the Caribbean. Good movie, but sorry, I just don't really. I'm not doing it. I don't trust it. I know you can make a fake Kraken come out and eat Johnny Depp out of the ocean in a ship. Then guess what? I'm pretty sure you can fake other things too.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean that's the history of mass media overall. Actually, is long-time ties to military intelligence and to the OSS, which would later become the CIA. I mentioned this many times. William Paley and Sarnoff. These are people from the OSS who are kind of the startup guys at CBS. You've got RKO Pictures, which is Rockefeller's, and this is eventually, if I recall, you get CBS. It gets kind of confusing as to when they all split and became, NBC, CBS, ABC, but it doesn't really matter because it's all pretty much still kind of under the same umbrella. You've got Howard Hughes at one time was heading up RKO Pictures. He's directly tied to the CIA, worked with the CIA in different projects and aerospace stuff. You've got Joseph JFK's dad for a time, I think, either ran or owned RKO Pictures. He was appointed the ambassador to London, so he's to England, so he's directly connected, obviously, with intelligence and British intelligence. So yeah, I mean, this stuff is all a big sort of intertwined web, and it's not hard to find these kinds of, hard proof connections, right? So it's not like we're stretching credulity here and trying to point these things out. It's all pretty bold faced and out there. And you've had, again, so many people in entertainment just happen to have also worked for intelligence. My buddy John Adams and Chris Kendall over at Hoaxbusters have done several podcasts just based on their research into TV cooks, believe it or not. Like Julia Child worked for the OSS. You've got other TV cook people who have some of these really strange intelligence connections as well. Now you say, well, that sounds ridiculous. I can't believe that. Why would that be? Well, because what these kinds of agencies do is not what most people think. They're not out there trying to hunt down the Reds or the terrorists. They are involved in culture creation, and that's a big part of what my book talks about is culture creation and Food Network and food shows, and food is a big part of culture.
Wow. You did wow, I didn't even think about that. But bam. Another form of mind control. My mother was right when she called the television the idiot box. She restricted our viewing capabilities to a large degree, to a period of time, because she let us have more free reign when we were younger, and she realized it was starting to affect a lot of things. She saw how it was affecting our thinking, and she didn't like it, so she actually she would force us. She was old school. She would force my brother and I on like summer break to go outside. 8 o'clock in the morning, she'd wake us up and literally throw us out of the house and not let us back in the house until the end of the day. She wanted us to go and use our imagination and think. And she was correct. The TV really is the idiot box. I mean, we know through Flickr 8 and through other things, and through scientific studies and stuff, that literally within about 18 seconds your brain goes into a different state, and you literally go from thinking to being in a downloadable, programmable mode. We are biological computers. It's that simple, and we are programmable. The Matrix wasn't too far off. Really wasn't too far off, especially if you understand quantum physics and you understand we kind of create our own reality. So we create the mess by picture us as we're computers, and Hollywood and the entertainment industry is the programming division of the powers that shouldn't be, and they pump that crap into our brains, and then we push that out because we actually live that. Well, not us, because we've been unplugged, so to speak, but others that are still kind of plugged in do. And I think listening to broadcasts like this, Jay, does help people unplug.
I think so, and one of the reasons that I write on film and sort of pop culture topics is precisely because that's where a lot of people's attention is focused. And before I was doing this, I was doing things more activism related, and trying to write on topics like the Federal Reserve or this or that. And I'm not saying that stuff's bad. I still do talk about those topics, but it's a lot. You can get a lot more attention if you tie those topics into, maybe a movie that deals with something related to the Federal Reserve. Which actually I have done analyses that it's not in the book, but I've written analyses in that vein, like the film by Tom Tykwer called The International with Clive Owen and Naomi Watts from a few years ago, which has these kind of bank scandals and scams in the background with connections to intelligence agencies and austerity programs and shock doctrine and this kind of IMF type stuff. So, you can find movies where there's even truths about economics. I've not yet seen The Big Short, but everybody says that this is kind of illustrates what happened in the 2008. And I have seen what was that movie with Will Smith and Real Guys, Tough Guys, whatever it's called, the comedy. That's actually about the 2008 banker bailout as well. So, surprisingly, there's quite a bit of truth presented in that film. So, you see this stuff all the time. And again, to go back to kind of the spy culture, spies and people in the establishment have for a long time, been writing in fiction what they couldn't get away with writing in fact. And of course, a lot more people are going to see the fiction anyway than read some sort of factual book. So I kind of tried to have the best of both worlds, and try a different approach to kind of waking people up through talking about something that everybody loves, which is movies.
It is a good way to wake people up. I mean, people do watch movies. There's one thing people know about. It's either sports or entertainment. Don't ask him who the vice president is. Don't ask him what the president's policies are or what wars we're getting into illegally. But if you ask them about their favorite football team, baseball team, and maybe perhaps soccer and or entertainment / music, movie star, TV star, man, could they tell you every personal tidbit of information about that person? It's like that person's their family member.
Well, I remember even myself, certain movies I watched, like back when I was, say, in high school, I thought they kind of stuck with me, where I was like, whoa, what's going on here? Like, I remember watching the Godfather trilogy, and at that time, I thought mobsters were just cool, I was, oh, cool, mobsters, yeah. And then, you're watching the movie and you're seeing the Don running black markets and this kind of stuff, and you think, oh, that's a movie. And then as you get older, you've been experienced to, you've experienced a lot more news and some of the real world, and then you start to notice, hey, maybe the real world is actually run kind of like the way the Godfather presents it. And I've written articles to that effect as well. And then other movies stuck with me, like even Conspiracy Theory, with Mel Gibson. I've always thought that was that's not the greatest film, but it's a pretty cool movie. And if you remember, you've got Captain Picard, Patrick Stewart's basically playing the role of an MK Ultra doctor, and they're doing all these weird tests on the Mel Gibson character Jerry in the film, and I always wonder, like, what is going on with that? And then you've got something like Jacob's Ladder, the Adrian Lyne film from 1991 or 3, where you have the same idea of MK Ultra being presented as this guy is sort of undergoing and reliving his traumatic experiences from war times, and the MK Ultra experiments are explicitly mentioned in the film. That always stuck with me, and I was like, what is that? What is MK Ultra? And even before I had any idea, back when I was 18 or 19, whenever it was, I bought that VHS movie. And so there's just so many examples of this kind of stuff that I just kind of cataloged away. And, as you get older and you're reading about the actual MK Ultra program, you read real books on it, you're like, holy crap, that was in a movie, but that was real. So, hey, I wonder how many other things are in movies that are real. And then you watch something like Apocalypse Now, and you realize, oh, actually there was a program where they tried to basically create serial killers, right? Guys who would go into villages and just randomly kill people, women and children, called the Phoenix Program. And so Doug Valentine has a whole book on this. And, maybe this has some connection to MK Ultra. So, you start to realize that a lot of what's in movies, again, obviously not everything, and that's the whole trick on my part, is to suss out reality from fiction. And, again, when I think of more examples, Oliver Stone movies come to mind. Obviously, I don't like every Oliver Stone movie, but a lot of those movies did stick with me and kind of make me think, what was the real story behind Heaven and Hell? What was the real story behind El Salvador? What was the real story behind Nixon or whatever?
Did you ever see his movie about the World Trade Center?
Actually, I skipped that one.
Yeah,
no, I have not.
I haven't. Well, I'm a kind of an Oliver Stone fan myself, but I can't bring myself to watch that film because from what I understand, it's pretty much just like it's garbage, and I don't know why he made it. I've heard rumors that he pissed off the powers that shouldn't be with JFK, and they warned him, don't touch 9/11 in any way, shape, or form. It happened the way it happened, and end of story. So I don't know if that's true or not, but yeah, I never looked at it myself. Interesting that you really didn't have any interest in it either.
Yeah, well, I mean, I kind of laugh I like Nicolas Cage. I actually think he's a really good actor, but he's also pretty funny. So maybe I should have seen it, given that I do try to watch most of Nicolas Cage's movies, but sometimes these movies just sort of slip by me and I forget about them too.
It didn't appeal.
I haven't even had a chance to see The Big Short, but I've been meaning to watch it.
Yeah, the Stones, that one, World Trade Center, didn't appeal. I haven't seen The Big Short either, but I've heard that it's pretty much like it could be labeled almost like a documentary,
right?
Pretty much for what happened in 2008. There's a bunch of films that are like that, especially now. You go back and watch certain things, you're like, wow. And yes, The International, it's actually a good film to understand how banks actually run things and how wars are started. There's a guy that does a whole speech about wars being bankers' wars, pretty much, in there. And then he explains to them that that's what war is for. It's all about getting the bank to fund both sides and making money and who's really the victor. And their faces as he's explaining all this are priceless, because they're like, you can see the light bulb going like coming on above their head.
They even track down like that old former KGB boss, and they're interrogating him, and he's, if I recall, it's been some years since I watched the movie, but he says something to the effect of, "Oh yeah, you think that I'm some sort of commie threat or something?" He's like, "You don't understand the big banks. Like, you don't understand who's really running this stuff." And I mean, how appropriate is that? Especially in my case, I've been just completed a week or two ago a several month-long series on the entirety of Carol Quigley's Tragedy and Hope. And what is the big thesis of that book? But that the banks pretty much run it all, and they've orchestrated the big wars.
It's very synchronistic that you did that, because I randomly, out of nowhere, I use Audible a lot because I'll be doing multiple things at once. And I've read Gary Allen's book, None Dare Call Conspiracy, probably about 10 times, but I just listened to it again the other day. And it's funny because you bring up Quigley. And a lot of the stuff we're talking about, he wrote about back in 1971. And he was talking about how the banker wars and everything, or, the wars are banker wars. And he was talking about tragedy and hope and how people really need to take Quigley seriously. For some reason, there's a lot of people that don't. I don't know why they don't want to read that book. They don't want to. They think he's a kooky professor. Why don't you listen to some of these people that are in positions of power who quote him and think he's such a great guy? Maybe we should pay attention more to his writings. I have the book myself, and it's extremely informative. And I know you just did that whole series on it. Before we go further, plug your YouTube channel. Shamelessly plug your channel and your website, Jay, because people need to hear it. They need to be able to know where to go. And I think watching your videos and listening to your analysis, with not just your interviews that you do, but your analysis itself is important. So go ahead and plug that.
Yeah, so the book is Esoteric Hollywood, Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film. And you can get the book, like I said, directly from me. Just there's a tab at the website where you can find my email, or you can message me on Twitter or Facebook, and we'll arrange sending you a signed copy of the book. The website is jaysanalysis.com, and you can subscribe to my lectures and talks there, and podcasts and interviews for $4.95 a month or $60 a year. And the YouTube channel is just Jay Dyer, I think. If you just type it in, you can find my channel pretty easy. And I try to do something video related at least once a week. And I try to write articles once a week, and then most days doing somebody's podcast or interview, so you can find a lot of material. I think there's over 1,000 posts at Jay's Analysis now, so over 100. There's 120 or so movie reviews and analyses. There's 300-400 other articles on philosophy, geopolitics. So there's a lot of material there, so you can definitely dive into the archive and. Yeah, I think everybody who's got the book so far, I've had only positive feedback. So everybody's really digging it, and I think you'll like it. I think it's there's not another book like it. I mean, I'm not trying to brag or say that like it's the greatest thing ever, but there's not another book out there that I've seen that really tries to combine philosophy and geopolitics and comedy and conspiracy and satire and metaphysics, all into one package.
Well, it's hard to do that, and you do so, and you keep it interesting and entertaining, which is important, as we talked about earlier to a large degree. What's that old expression? If you're going to tell people the truth, make them laugh, or else they'll kill you.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, before we get sidetracked into 100 other things, because there's so many questions and so many things I want to bring up with you, I have to say, Jay, talking to you is it's a breath of fresh air to be able to talk to somebody that's intelligent and free-thinking and can actually hold themselves in a conversation. Yes, it's a breath of fresh air, brother. Before we get on to a bazillion other things, one last thing about Kubrick, and then we can move on to Spielberg. Your thoughts on The Shining. I know you cover a couple different movies of Kubrick's, and everybody's in the book, but The Shining in particular, I know a lot of people have focused on it because of other people's work on it. What's your thoughts on it?
Well, I think that what I try to do in my analysis would be complementary to Jay Wiedner's. He and I we've spoken about this, and actually we're planning on doing 3 seasons of a show, actually a TV show based on my book and his work, because it really parallels and complements so well. And that'll be basically episodes that are dealing with either a director or a movie per episode. So I think right out of the bat, we're probably going to start with something like Blade Runner. So, we're going to try to interview directors and stuff too. I don't know how we'll be able to get like Ridley Scott or anything like that, but we'll try to get who we can. And so his view, of course, I'm sure everybody knows that you've got more or less Kubrick saying that there's a, he's hinting in through different films about the moon landing being staged and using, these different camera tricks and front screen projection and all that. And so and I'm not saying that that's all wrong, but what I wanted to do with my analysis was just really focus on the story as it's told and the symbolisms that are there in the film within the film's context. So I'm not saying that you can't ever broaden the context and say, how does The Shining relate to the rest of the Kubrick canon? I think you can do that, and you should do that. And I do a little bit of that, but mainly I stick with the story and say, look, this is a retelling of a kind of the ancient Minotaur myth, more or less. And Jack Nicholson's character kind of plays that evil Minotaur who's more or less hunting down his own son, Danny, throughout this maze. And we do get the impression that Danny has been abused. And I do have to give credit to Rob Ager for pointing that out. And I gave him credit in the book, so I didn't steal that from him or anything. You do see these hints about Jack. He's reading Playgirl. He's got this kind of homoerotic aspect to him that seems to be bubbling forth and affecting his marriage. And then he just basically, I argue, gradually over time gives into full demonic possession. So I think that it's kind of a ghost story, but the ghosts are pretty much demonic. I mean, the guy wants to chop up his family. So, what is Kubrick telling us in this movie? If we want to expand it into a broader scope, well, a lot of Kubrick movies deal with sexual abuse. They deal with human trafficking. They deal with mind control. I mean, Lolita, you've got Barry Lyndon, you've got Clockwork Orange, right? I mean, all these films have these same themes. The Shining, Eyes Wide Shut, right? Lily Sobieski's character in Eyes Wide Shut is underage and being pimped out. So that's how the route that I take with The Shining is that, yeah, and I think that's probably what Stephen King was after, was because he's always trying to tell some ghost story or demon story. But I thought it was very well executed, by Kubrick, and it's a very profound telling of this problem of generational abuse and trauma, and the production of a fractured psyche in the person of Danny. All these elements are there, as well as a lot of these mythological elements that Kubrick does include in his films. 2001 is full of mythological elements, with Bowman being this Odysseus character who goes off on the journey and then has to find his way home. These sort of archetypal stories.
You just made me think too. You said King, and all of a sudden I thought of his book It. Now, I mean, I've seen the movie, the TV movie. I think everybody's seen it with Tim Curry as Pennywise. But I tried
watching that not too long ago, and it was cracking me up. It was the funniest thing I'd ever seen.
Right, it wasn't scary. Like when you watch it as an adult, you're like, "This is
funny."
Like, first of all, if there was like a clown trying to attack me, you put a 40 cal round through its head, and then the clown is no longer trying to attack you. Like killer clowns, really. Anyway, it's interesting that you said, Stephen King, because it made me think of that book. I read the book itself. I mean, not only did I actually, like I said, I've seen the TV thing, but I actually read the book, and I even mailed it when I was a kid. I was like, I don't know, 11 or 12 or something like that. I mailed the book to him. I found his address online, and I mailed the book to him, and he actually signed it and mailed it back to me.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, I still have it. It's like locked up in my closet. I don't let oxygen touch it. But the book itself, it made me think of the story. The clown was killing kids, and its target, it didn't attack adults. Its target was children.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I was
and he traumatizes kids. Yeah.
Yeah, and he traumatizes the children, and it's a clown. A child-based thing. I mean, adults are afraid of clowns, but that fear comes from them usually from when they're kids, right? Usually it's from most
didn't John Wayne Gacy dress up like a clown too?
Yes.
Yeah.
He had a lot of paintings too, like self-portraits of him. Well, there are self-portraits. I don't know how many actual vintage Gacys are floating around out there, but there are actual vintage clown Gacys floating around. It's disturbing. So it just made me think of that when you were talking about Stephen King. See, like I said, having a conversation with you makes my brain go. My brain already goes 100 miles an hour, but now it's doing like.
Is there a velvet Gacy, like the velvet Elvis paintings? Could you get like a velvet John Wayne Gacy painting?
That's a good question, and I know he actually has a decent amount of them. If you watch documentaries,
I'm just joking, man.
Well, it's interesting.
I was thinking about or like the dogs playing pool. Could you get John Wayne Gacy with those dogs playing pool or something?
Probably. Well, yeah.
I'm being goofy.
No, I know you were being goofy, but honestly, there's actually a whole side thought. There's a whole industry on that where people go around collecting or selling memorabilia from serial killers. There's a documentary.
Well, that I had heard about because I remember back when Guns N' Roses did their was it the Spaghetti album or something? There was like a Manson connection to that, and I remember him talking on the news about how there's like this subculture where the people collect Manson memorabilia and all stuff like this.
Yeah, it gets worse. I mean, it's even darker. There's a documentary on Netflix about it. And I mean, I had known a little bit about it, and I stumbled upon this, and I was like, I have to watch this. And my jaw hit the floor. I was just like, I've studied serial killers as a side thing for years because a lot of it ties into the, like you said, MK Ultra and mind control experiments and other things. And it's just a side thing I've investigated for years and years and years. That's creepy into itself, but like the serial killers and how they operate and stuff. But I think it's even, well, not even weirder, but it's a different level of weirdness that people actually go and collect their stuff, or they're like, a lot of these guys painted or drew stuff after they were in prison or whatnot, and people collect that stuff or letters they wrote, and it's this like weird fascination with serial killers. But yes, to answer your question, I believe there were a bunch of different Gacy paintings. So it just, you made me think of that. That whole thing started when you said Stephen King, and I was like, wow, the clown, he abused kids, his targets were kids, and he usually like ate them or devoured them.
Well, Stephen King probably heard, I mean, I don't know, but he probably heard the story of John Wayne Gacy, and that probably gave him an idea or something. I'm just guessing, I don't know. But I thought it was funny that Manson recently was talking about how important global warming was, which really makes me question I kind of agnostic on what really went down with the whole Manson thing, because I tend to think, I'm not saying there's no serial killers, but I tend to agree with David McGowan's thesis in Program to Kill that some of this could be hyped up and kind of a larger sort of psyop type thing. And then when you look at it from that angle and all these weird connections that Manson had, and now he's out talking about climate change and global warming, and that's the most pressing issue. That's like pretty ridiculous to me.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a pretty recent interview you can find. I think it's like a local news clip, but you just type in Charles Manson climate change, and he's like, climate change, that's the most important problem we got.
Right.
That's the debut of my Manson impersonation for you right here.
That's awesome. Thank you for breaking out your first ever Manson impersonation on my show.
You know who Bob Odenkirk is, right?
Yes, he's awesome.
He does a hilarious Manson. Have you ever seen it?
No.
Look up the clip of Bob Odenkirk doing Manson on the Ben Stiller show. It's on YouTube. It's really funny.
His character of Saul Goodman is just he plays such a scumbag attorney so well. He really. Yeah. If I joke all the time, if I ever got in trouble, I need my own Saul Goodman for real. I think I know the government has about 50 of them on staff. Anyway, I agree about Kubrick's work. Like I said earlier, I think there's this, at least to a degree, there's an underlying message that there's pedophile ring. So, and there's I'm in the book. I know you get more into it, and I want people to look further into it. But I know the listeners love the Kubrick stuff, and it's a rabbit hole, so to speak, unto itself. But there's so much other stuff in Jay's book that I want to cover with him. So I'm going to move on to Spielberg now. It's interesting because, as I said earlier, I think it was Jay Wiedner that brought this up, that when Kubrick died, the script went to Spielberg, and then he altered it because I guess the original script was more heavily exposing this pedophilia and this pedophile ring and how pervasive it was to a degree. So I guess they altered it, and then AI, as we know it, was released by Spielberg.
That is the story. Well, I called it a transhumanist fairy tale. And I think that Spielberg is doing this sort of reversal flip thing where what we see in a lot of sci-fi now is the idea that the humans are inhumane and the bots are truly humane, right? So you've got all these bots that are caring and compassionate and sort of innocent and in this Edenic state. And then in the AI film, Martin, the crippled boy, is more like it's like Cain and Abel, and he's more like Cain, right? And David is the good kid because he's the bot. He's not subject to imperfection, although he does kind of undergo a sort of fall, I argue. But I see this as connected to the Spielberg canon, and you're absolutely right. I don't think it's accidental that Spielberg's kind of trying to pick up the legacy or the flame, keep the flame going from Kubrick, in the sense of trying to take on these huge deep state spiritual type motifs, I guess you could say. Now, I'm not saying that I think everything Spielberg's saying is good or that it's all bad. I just take him as a person who, I think he probably genuinely believes that aliens are real, and that that transhumanism is the future and this kind of stuff. But I think he, in that capacity, he then functions as a means by which to try to convert everybody into these ideas. And so what I do is take a step back and kind of look at the beginnings of science fiction. And obviously there wasn't enough space to take on every single, Jules Verne or Heinlein or all of them. So I just picked H.G. Wells as kind of a seminal character, because he was, if we were to think about the idea of predictive programming, there's so much predictive programming in H.G. Wells, it's like phenomenal. You've got, Shape of Things to Come, you've got First Men on the Moon, you've got genetic modification and the Island of Dr. Moreau, you've got so-called atomic weaponry in other works, you've got elements of the time machine that are very curious, specifically in terms of the film version. And he was explicitly a Fabian socialist Freemason. So H.G. Wells's science fiction, I don't think you can't divorce it from the overall philosophy and worldview that he has. And what H.G. Wells does is, I think, function as a kind of evangelist. Whether he knew it or not, I'm not sure. He probably did. He's an evangelist for scientism, and scientism, for those that may not be familiar with that, is just the idea that the scientific method, which is obviously very valid, and it's a great tool for discovering truths about the natural world, but the idea that the scientific method it can somehow magically sort of be expanded into itself a grand narrative that explains the totality of reality, I think is ridiculous. And that's the modern world that we live in. And one of the great evangelists of that ideology of scientism was H.G. Wells, and he did it through fiction. The idea that through the scientific method, the scientist is the great candle holder of reason in the midst of the vast darkness of ignorance and superstition. And that's actually how it's presented in The Time Machine. There's this scene in the book where the time traveler, who's the scientist, gets lost in this cave of Morlocks, and he lights this flame, and H.G. Wells says something flowery about it sort of being the flame of the light of reason or something to that effect. Anyway, so what you have in a lot of these characters, Edgar Rice Burroughs, Robert Heinlein, Frank Herbert, Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, all these well-known science fiction. I'm not saying they're all bad, but I'm saying what you tend to have is this promotion of an ideology in the background, and especially with the figure of Wells. And, he openly says it's going to be a giant communistic socialist world government. That is your future. It's what it's going to be. That is what science and reason necessarily dictate the future to predetermined be, right? Which I don't believe that. I think it's preposterous. But that shows you that he's got an agenda. It's not just harmless science fiction. It's not just, he happened to be a Mason. No. He has an agenda, and that's what it is. And it's, I don't think we have to tell your audience about the dangers of like world socialism and Marxism or radical communism or anything like that. But, you read his books, and he's got the characters saying, we're going to get rid of marriage. We're going to get rid of giving children or birthing children naturally, right? Like even Huxley says this in the very first few chapters of Brave New World. So I look at a lot of these seminal fiction writers because they would be so influential on the Hollywood people. And all these guys, Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, they all had their sci-fi novels made into movies, even, back in the 40s and 50s and so forth, 60s. So this is central to the rise of science fiction. And I wish I had put this chapter in the book. I really wanted to. It'll definitely be in a part 2 if there's a sequel. If you read Frank Herbert's Dune, it's just unbelievable, all of the elements that he put in that book. You've got geoengineering, more or less chemtrails in that book. He wrote this in the 60s. You've got terraforming, you've got espionage, you've got sex spies, you've got mind control. All of that is in Frank Herbert's Dune. And if you don't believe me, you can go read my Dune analysis at Jay's Analysis. And so, here you've got people in the 60s writing about this stuff. So, and then, this is what we've seen with science fiction. It's always been putting into the work of art or the propaganda what would be the case in the future, right? Futurism. Now, is that all propaganda? No, I'm not saying it's all propaganda. Sometimes it's just creative minds projecting, what the future would be. Like Philip K. Dick comes up a lot in my book. But Philip K. Dick was also supposedly hanging out with all these Silicon Valley people, right? And what would become Silicon Valley. So it's probably more likely that he was talking to these people and, tripping out on shrooms or whatever with them. And they're saying, man, one day we're going to have total surveillance and all this kind of stuff. And so he writes it into his fiction. And so, to what degree was he a propagandist? To what degree was he, really wanting human liberation? I don't know. It's hard to say. But did they drive him mad? I don't know. But anyway, that's the whole point of the H.G. Wells science fiction propaganda and Spielberg mythos chapter, is just to point out that a lot of science fiction is also trying to condition you in a certain direction, whether the individual directors and authors know it or not even.
H.G. Wells, I just want to point out, to the War of the Worlds broadcast, that was a total psyop.
It was. And then who remakes it? Spielberg, right. So, no, I
wait, you couldn't make that up, by the way. Like, you couldn't, like, Hollywood couldn't have written that for you, Jay. You see what I'm saying? Like, reality is actually even stranger than the crap that they put out over there. Yeah.
And I have to be fair to people, because it's not like an attack book. Like, I don't know Steven Spielberg. Obviously, I never met Stanley Kubrick. I don't know David Lynch. I don't know Christopher Nolan. I don't know any of these directors. I don't know their individual motivations, but I just try to look at the artwork and say, what is this trying to say? And I think if we look at E.T., I do a chapter on E.T. There's a lot of weird deep state stuff going on with E.T. I mentioned the War of the Worlds radio psyop broadcast, the promotion of aliens, who's behind this, what's behind this. And in my view, and I'm not saying everybody who believes in aliens is totally kook, but I don't believe in aliens personally, and I've never seen anything to completely convince me of aliens. But I do believe that the government wants us to believe in aliens, and I believe that Hollywood wants us to believe in aliens, and so that's why I look at seminal alien films like E.T.
I believe that there's extraterrestrial intelligence, but I don't believe the BS that comes out of Hollywood. I just knowing, knowing nothing else, even if I just took what Werner von Braun supposedly said, that they have 5 different cards that they would play, and I mean every one of them has been talked about. And the one thing that the 2 of them at the end and von Braun talked about were asteroid strike from outer space and or alien invasion. And what do you see constantly the past 20, 30? I mean, I know alien invasions, UFOs stuff goes back, into the 50s and the 60s and stuff in films and in science fiction and all that. But I'm talking about currently the past 20, 30 years. What have you seen jammed down everybody's throat? Alien invasion and or asteroid/comet slamming into the Earth, right?
Well, right, which in my view I take to be kind of a fear-based sort of psyop, right? Like, I think that apocalypse culture, I think that zombie end of the world outbreak patterns and trends, or the giant asteroid or the alien invasion, I think that these are just really sort of fear-based, panic-based messages that go back to, like you said, that test of the War of the Worlds thing. How can we keep people in a state of perpetual fear of the external threat, regardless of what it is? And so, for example, if you go back to the Twilight Zone, a lot of the Twilight Zone episodes were made in tandem with the Department of Defense, believe it or not, and it's actually listed in the credits of the episodes that they made together. Now, what are a lot of those episodes about? Well, a lot of them are about the external alien, quote-unquote, threat. Now, what would most likely be the Department of Defense's interest in working with the Twilight Zone to promote the fear of the external threat? Well, in my view, it would be related to things like either World War II or the Cold War, right? So in most people's minds, subconsciously, these, say, alien body snatcher pod people, they kind of operate like communists are supposed to, right? They have a hive mind. They don't have individual thought. They don't value that. They try to bring everybody into this collective. Well, that supports the Cold War narrative of fighting, the Russians or something. So in my view, a lot of those kinds of things from 50s and 60s were probably supported in some degree by the Pentagon. And if that sounds crazy, there's a book called Operation Hollywood, where a lot of academics write on this very topic. And they, for example, point out movies that you wouldn't on the surface expect, unless you were, aware of these things, that were total recruitment films. So, for example, if you've ever seen the movie Stripes with Bill Murray and John Candy, and Ivan Reitman or somebody who
yes, Ivan Reitman made it. Totally made me want to join the military after seeing the movie.
Now, and if you watch it, at the end of it says made in tandem with either the Army or Department of Defense, and that was a recruitment film. Right, and what's the whole point? Well, the whole point of the movie is stop being a loser like Bill Murray, laying around in your apartment and your girlfriend left you. Join the Army with your buddies, and then what happens? Oh, they're great Cold War heroes. They're on Time magazine. I mean, it's like totally preposterous, but I guess it works. I mean, I think my dad watched Top Gun back in the 80s, and that sort of inspired him to join the Navy. So now I'm not saying that everybody that joins military is inherently evil or anything. I'm just pointing out that, you start to realize that this is not new. It's been going on for a long time. And they were churning out war movies back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. I mean, there's just like a zillion war movies, and a lot of these are made, with Pentagon assistance.
Still to this day, by the way, because every branch of the military has a division that works specifically with Hollywood. I was in the military. I was in the Coast Guard, and I know they actually filmed Bad Boys 2 around the time that I was in the Guard, and I got a chance to witness some of that taking place. And I got a chance to experience it firsthand, how very functional, hand in hand, Hollywood works with the Pentagon, and every branch has a liaison that works with them. So I mean, this is again nothing new under the sun. The military uses deception by itself. I mean, look at Patton and his fake army that they used to deceive the Germans, where the landings of D-Day would actually
was that the inflatable tanks and stuff.
Yep. I mean, they still do things like that to this day. I mean, the Russians and even us, we still do things like that to this very day. So, sleight of hand and magic, so to speak, entertainment as a way of warfare is nothing new to these people. In fact, entertainment it's really not about entertainment. Hollywood is weaponized. Alan Watt is correct. He's done a lot of work on this, and he says he's quoted as saying that entertainment has never been about entertainment. It's always been about control, and that's what they do. And they literally use this form of entertainment, this thing called entertainment. People think it's one thing, but it's really not. Like I said, they're being programmed, but they don't even know they're being programmed. You can't have any resistance or you're not going to put up any resistance if you don't know that what's being done to you is negative. You're just going to sit there and willingly watch it. I mean, again, how many people's opinions have been formulated because they watch something on television and later on they're pissed off about something, but they don't understand really the minutia of anything, and they get into a debate about somebody or about it with somebody, and that person will destroy them, and they really don't understand why, and then they can't. It's like this. They just can't figure out what the deal is, and I've literally watched people experience that myself, and after conversating with them and talking to them about things, I say, well, okay, why did you have that thought? Why did you bring that up to me? Why did you try to debate that with me? Why did you try to bring this issue to me? And I'll say, where did you get that from? Where did you get that from? And you know what they'll eventually say? I heard it on TV. From either the news, and, I heard so-and-so movie star or pop star or rap star talk about it. I'm like, right. So the entertainment industry, the television, the idiot box, your smartphone, which is just an extension of the idiot box, that idiot box is what's giving you your information. And by the way, it's that same idiot box now that's telling you that the alternative media is fake and that you can only believe them, even though they've been caught lying to you over and over and over and over and over. I mean, we don't have to point back, by the way, to 91 when the first Gulf War, when CNN got caught faking footage. No, we don't have to go all the way back to that, which you could. How about when Nancy Grace and the other one, Ashley Banfield, they were in the same parking lot, and they were acting like they were miles away from each other, and they were like 50 feet from one another with green screens. What's the point? Why would they do that? Because they do that constantly. It was a one-off thing. It's, like we said earlier, it's all fake. I like to call it a live-action play. Anyway, I know I've kind of ranted a little bit. So getting back into Spielberg, and then we can... I want to ask you about the 70s and 80s portion of the book, because you melted my brain again. When I saw that, there was a couple things in there that even, as much research that I have done, never even thought about it until you mentioned it. And then as soon as you mentioned it, it's like, oh my God, that makes total sense. Like, because I never understood it. And I usually find that if you don't understand something that comes out in film, like when the general public sees it and they go, I really didn't like it, I didn't understand it, there's usually something hidden there. There's usually some darker or deeper meaning to it, and that's why people don't get it, because it's not rockets and bombs and flashy. It's putting a message out, but perhaps their brain, for whatever reason, knows what's going on subconsciously, and it's their own way of cognitive dissonance and trying to push away from it. Whatever the case may be, I find that whenever the general public seems to think a movie sucks, it makes me want to watch it that much more, just to see if there's some underlying context that the rest of them are missing. And I find that to be out there with a lot of stuff. But what really popped my brain was the Sean Connery film, Zardoz. I was like, when I saw that, I was like, wait, what? Hold on. I've always seen this film and wondered why the hell Connery did this. With, all the other, he was great as Bond and he was good in all these other films. Why would you, okay, I guess... I always, you think about it, you're like, I guess that was popular in Hollywood. You really don't put much thought into it. You're like, I guess it just came across his desk and he was like, yeah, I'll do it. But now, knowing what I know, right, and going back and looking at it, again, mind blown. Well done, Jay.
That one is crazy. Yeah, I had a friend several years ago say, dude, you need to do Zardoz. And just like you, I was like, that's that one with Sean Connery wearing his underwear, right? Yeah. And I'm like, what the heck is that about? I remember, and the first time I tried to watch it, within 20 minutes, I was like, what in the world? And then that same buddy kept hounding me. He's like, dude, just finish the movie. And so I stuck with it, and then I was like, yeah, that is really, really bizarre. And if you haven't seen the movie, I'm sure you could dig it up somewhere pretty easily. It is worth watching because I'll go ahead and give this aspect of spoiler out. Zardoz is short for Wizard of Oz. So it's this whole idea of the man behind the screen, right? It's the whole idea of the establishment, the state, Hollywood, whatever, really trying to sort of be that deified God power that gives you meaning, that gives you your morals, which of course change every week or every month or every year based on what the allowable PC topics are, I guess. I mean, it's not consistent, but that's okay because they don't want you to be consistent. They want you to basically just follow, and that is the message of Zardoz. Some of it I don't like. It does seem to have this kind of weird obsession with death, which I talk about in Zed, who is the Sean Connery character, kind of takes on this eternal death role. It's very bizarre. It's very hard to describe until you've seen the movie, but like the other films that we mentioned, it does have a lot of mythological elements, and you kind of have this savage, primitive dude and his tribe who are ruled over by these beings that they perceive to be gods, but they're really just humans that have achieved immortality through technology. And so what they do is they use the technology to appear to be divine. And I guess you could argue in a way they are kind of semi-divine because they've created this sort of AI supercomputer that they call the Tabernacle that's able to regenerate them, and it kind of functions like this smart city thing, and they more or less live in a kind of Elysian fields of the gods' Edenic state, and they're completely apathetic, right? So they've experienced every pleasure, and they don't really have pleasure anymore. They don't really care about anything. And the irony there is that Zed mounts this sort of Promethean overthrow of the gods, and it's a very easy coup because the gods don't really care about anything. They're just apathetic. And so then Zed takes over, and you kind of get the idea that it's this notion out of Nietzsche called eternal return. And if you're familiar with the Ouroboros symbol, that's sort of the old classic meaning of the Ouroboros. Well, I mean, it has different meanings, but if you were to read Nietzsche, it would be eternal return, which is the idea that basically everything's just sort of in a state of eternal repetition, something like the Hindu wheel or whatever. And maybe you got to escape this wheel of temporal trap or evolve out of it or something like this, depending on what religious tradition we're talking about. But in this case, you get the impression that it's sort of where Adam and Eve come from. And so the old notion of the golden age of the gods, right? And then the story maybe of Prometheus is being presented in the movie Zardoz. And this is, perhaps where the first man and woman come from, right? Maybe this is Adam and Eve or something, roughly speaking. And so it's a very bizarre film. I don't always use the term Illuminati or Illuminist because it's overused. But if you look to the actual, historic Bavarian Illuminati, they were Enlightenment rationalists and deists, and they were into Scientism, right? They would be, somebody like H.G. Wells would be in that tradition of an Illuminist. And so I chose that term for this film very consciously because this one actually does present the Illuminist philosophy, right? Which is just basically the idea of reason and rationalism overthrowing the supposed superstition of the gods.
Interestingly enough, two things. One, like you were talking about communism and how they pretty much say in some of the ideas of these science fiction films is, especially like H.G. Wells, eventually you're going to have this communist government. And and that's it. Well, it's interesting that they ascribe to Illuminism because communism really isn't communism. Communism is just the Marx never wrote it. It was the writings of Adam Weishaupt, which the group of just men, they called themselves, got together. They pretty much rewrote it, stamped Marx's name on it, and had him run with it about 70 years later. But it's Illuminism. So it's just interesting. Again, you have to do research, ladies and gentlemen. A quick little place to start just on that little piece alone is, again, Gary Allen's book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, which then from that book you can go into a ton of other research. But there's so many different ways you can, as you read and you educate yourself to this, you'll be talking to somebody like Jay or whoever, or you'll be reading something and your brain will be doing just what we're doing with this conversation, where you'll be having these epiphanies and you'll be going, oh my God, and you'll be making these connections. And we're verbally doing that between the two of us for your benefit. So I just thought I thought about the communism thing and the H.G. Wells thing. Also, Sean Connery has a thing for being in Illuminati themed films. The Man Who Would Be King.
Yeah, I was going to mention that.
Yeah. There's another one. Your thoughts on that film?
Well, once again, we're back at sort of the British imperial idea and possibly British intelligence with the character of Rudyard Kipling, who wrote it. And Kipling, intentionally puts into that story, if I recall, the notion of Masonic lodges. And I'm of the opinion that, at least when it comes to British Freemasonry, that this was a tool of the empire. Now, there's a really good book that everybody's kind of talking about, but I've not had a chance to buy it yet because it's like $60 or something. But and I've got it on my to get list, but it's something to the effect of the British Empire's usage of Masonic lodges, throughout whatever centuries or something, 18 to 1900 or so, 20th century, something like that. Anyway, and the point of the book is more or less that the lodge system functioned as kind of the private intelligence, secret intelligence network of the empire. And if you think about it, that makes perfect sense. I mean, in terms of, pragmatic power politics, if you're the Queen of England and the various lords and bankers of London, what is this entity of lodges throughout the world useful for? Well, it's useful for information. And I think that's probably a lot of what's going on here with this lodge system. And that's what you see in the storyline, because once again, it's kind of another Zardoz type story where Sean Connery plays this character who tries to be a god king to deceive this sort of primitive tribes people. And I don't think it's accidental that it's connected to Masonic subterfuge, because that's precisely the type of approach that the empire would take. I mean, the empire, the British Empire would deify itself, right? I mean, you see these paintings of, say, Elizabeth, and she sort of took on this. She was known as the Virgin Queen, right? Kind of identifying herself as this sort of Marian or Marist type imagery with the Virgin Mary or something like this, and you get the employing of Edmund Spenser to write this vast mythology of how the British Empire and Albion is the continuation of the Roman Empire, right? He's taking the place of Virgil, right? Virgil wrote the imperial mythology for Rome in the Aeneid, and Edmund Spenser is supposed to be doing this for Elizabeth. So, all of this mystical stuff is, I think, really just sort of cloak for power politics. Now, I'm not saying that there's nothing to mystical thought, but I'm saying that in regard to the subjects that we're talking about, or The Man Who Would Be King, the point of that movie is, the Illuminism here is we present ourselves as gods and we trick you stupid, profane idiots.
That story's been retold too, a few times in a few different films. Mm-hmm. There's an animated Disney film, and I can't remember the title of it right now, but it's like about the Aztecs.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Somebody made a video a long time ago pointing out how The Man Who Would Be King is you just like Atlantis or Emperor's New Groove, or what was some Disney movie? It's called
Hollywood Illuminati, or Illuminati Hollywood, I think is the title of it. I actually have his video posted on my website, federaljack.com.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, that's a great film. I'm glad you've seen the same one. So there's so many retellings of the same Kipling story. He brings up Stargate, and he shows how the character of Daniel in Stargate is the same almost to a degree as the character that Sean Connery plays, where they both have this Masonic themed, well,
Of course, it goes back further than the Masons, but for their purposes and what they're doing with it, it's a Masonic-themed symbol. And then these natives, no matter if it's in Stargate or in The Man Who Would Be King, they both worship this symbol as a symbol of the gods. And because they're both wearing this symbol, they're viewed as a god, even though they're both not gods.
Is this the Stargate with
Kurt Russell,
James Spader and Kurt Russell?
Yep, that'd be the one.
Yeah.
That whole film. I mean, and there's other things. I mean, there's a lot of Egyptian symbolism. The spaceship is a pyramid. I mean, there's a lot of weirdness. You know, what are they trying to say? And even if you cut the sci-fi stuff out of it, there's just a lot of occult references in there. I mean, the guards are running around with they look like Anubis. Right, there's a lot of Egyptian I don't want to say mythology. There's a lot of Egyptian history and Egyptian symbolism in that film itself. And then you have Freemasonry, and that all goes back to the ancient mystery schools and everything else. I mean, you have to, again, ladies and gentlemen, you have to take the time to research. I don't want you to listen to this interview with Jay and then be like, okay, I know everything. I can go out and... No, you can't. You have to buy Jay's book. And then, I mean, that's a good... I'm not just plugging his stuff. It's a good place to start. And then spend a couple months researching this stuff before you start, like, openly discussing it with people who don't know anything about this. If you're going to discuss it with other people that know about this, that's good, because then you have somebody you can bounce some stuff off of. But just blurting it out on a YouTube video... There's so much to it to understand the nuance of all of this, and to be able to, point stuff out. I mean, there are times I can't even watch TV anymore. I'm sure you probably experience this more than anyone, but I can't watch TV or film anymore without being, damn it, there's more symbolism of some sort or another. I mean, you could be a multi-millionaire, but you'd have to have a crew helping you, because you could write a book a day if you could pump them out just on the amount of symbolism in TV shows and movies. And this goes back in. We're talking about The Man Who Would Be King and Zardoz, which is Zardoz is from 1974. We're in 2016. I mean, they didn't. How many channels did they have back when we were kids? Now they have like 150 or 300 channels of garbage. I mean, how much programming, how much of this stuff is literally out there? I mean, how many? It's amazing. Like my mother used to say, TV is the idiot box.
Well, the great thing about if you get my book, it's fun because you get to go back and watch a bunch of movies. I mean, who doesn't like watching movies? And if you could learn through watching movies, then you take your time. My book's kind of chopped up into little sections. It's not like a thing you have to sit and read, beginning to end. You could read an analysis, watch the movie, reflect on it, and go back, reread it. And you can read these sections in a few minutes, and you're like, oh, okay, so now I see a different angle on what Spielberg was presenting, or Kubrick, or Ridley Scott, or whoever it might be.
There's a lot to just sit back, and even if you don't want to research and do thousands of hours of reading into all these books right off the bat, start off. You'll want to do it afterwards, because you're going to read Jay's book, right? And then you're going to watch all these films, and then you're going to be like, mind blown, I have to go further. You're a physical embodiment of like a key. The lock is the person's mind. Your work is the key. It unlocks their mind. And once your mind is unlocked, ladies and gentlemen, your eyes will never see things the same way again. You will see patterns, and you will see all of this stuff. And Jay won't have to, make you drink the water, so to speak. His job is like mine, is to lead the horse to the water. You have to choose to drink. But once you do, you'll be amazed and just astounded at the amount of information that's out there. I know we're running out of time, Jay, because you've given me almost 2 hours already. So I know we're going to go in a few minutes, but I wanna pick your brain on two other things really quick. First,
sure.
I know 007 big thing, but before we get into that, the Neverending Story. I remember watching The Neverending Story as a kid, and I thought it was a great movie. But as I got older and I got further into researching this stuff and the occult and everything else, I always wondered,
because there were certain things about that film that just stuck out. And I never took the time to go back and look at it. And then, you get so involved in researching all this other stuff, it kind of gets put on the back shelf. And I was reading through the book, and I was like, wait, the Neverending Story. Expand. You don't have to get into too much detail, because I want people to go read the book. But explain the Neverending Story, your analysis to a degree, somewhat, whatever you want to share.
Well, like you, I grew up watching this movie, and kind of like Labyrinth or Legend. I didn't choose the movies that I chose, to put in here necessarily because they were the best movies. Like, some of these are pretty bad, but that kind of makes it more interesting, right? To have kind of campy, cheesy movies in here as well as big blockbusters. And the Neverending Story is bizarre. It's actually a foreign movie, but the author of the book, and I never read the book when I was a kid, so I learned all this later on, was influenced by Theosophy and Crowley. And so Michael Ende, I guess he's a German guy, who's the author, has this sort of magical sort of worldview. And he explicitly says, on his website, that he utilized Egyptian theology, Zen, Kabbalah, Emanuel Swedenborg, Eliphas Levi, Soren Kierkegaard, Friedrich Weinrab, and, of course, Rudolf Steiner, who is the founder of Anthroposophy, sort of a split-off idea of theosophy that's sort of a syncretistic kind of blending of all the religions. And then he just sort of blended them all into this very strange story about the Bastian, right? This kid who gets sort of lost in this mythological world that then suddenly finds its way breaking into this world. And there's some very bizarre statements made in this movie, such as when Bastian screams "Moonchild," which you would be, if you're not familiar with Crowley, that's a Crowley novel that he wrote. And why is that in this kids movie? Well, I mean, you can watch the movie and turn the what do you call them, the subtitles on, and you'll see that is what he's saying. And he's got basically the missing mother motif that Jamie Hanshaw talks about so often in her books. And if you want another book that's kind of like my book, her Hollywood Mind Control is pretty good. You should read that. And so Bastian has a higher self, this character in Fantasia called Atreyu, and they end up sort of being linked, and they have this mirror gate thing where they go past these sphinxes, and I mean, it's just crazy. Right? I mean, if you haven't seen the movie, you got to see it. But I go into a lot of the mythology, and I cite sort of some of the older Jewish mythological texts and angelology of Judaism, and I cite Plato's Timaeus about what the Ouroboros symbol is, because that's on the cover of the book. And I mean, it's very difficult to explain in brief what this is about, but it's definitely Michael Ende was definitely sort of blending all of these traditions together into his own concoction, presumably because he thought that all religions are just blended concoctions. I'm not sure, but yeah, you've got weird vaginal symbolism, and you've got these kind of Hindu ideas of the whole world being created from a grain of salt, and it's just very bizarre. So I think that princess is she represents like the Gnostic principle of creating the world, a new world, and Bastian becomes then the sort of self-creator of his own world. And then if you remember the end, he's flying on that giant skanky-looking dog dragging around. Like he's the god of his own world all of a sudden. I mean, this is pretty much what a lot of the Hermetic traditions teach, that you're going to be your own god or something and create your own world and stuff.
And the nothing would be representative of death, wouldn't it? The end of things?
Well, it could, yeah. In one manifestation, or it could just be the traditional Western notion of non-being in philosophy or in metaphysics, or privation. That is essentially what evil is defined as. So if you're a Platonist, or if you're Aristotle, or even Christian theologians of the early church, many of them in the Western tradition would have defined evil as simply non-being, non-existence.
Interesting. It's kind of how the elitists look at humanity. If people have ever looked into any of Mark Passio's work, I've had him on the broadcast multiple times, and he's talked about they consider general humanity dead, like soulless, not in touch. It's interesting that that's the thought on that, because it's almost like the nothing is that soullessness, that not being connected to your soul, and the princess.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, did you see Westworld?
The new one, no, I haven't on HBO. I've seen the original film, yes, but not the no, not yet. I haven't seen that new remake garbage on HBO.
Well, it's weird. I'll say that for sure. But
is it?
It does have that very notion in it, because the bots that wake up are the only ones that are spoken of as conscious. And in other words, the bots in the movie represent humans in general.
Interesting. See, that's what made me think. As soon as you said, like, my first thought was the nothing, like I said, could be, visual, like a visual representation of death or whatever. But when you brought up the idea that it's more like being disconnected and soulless, being disconnected from oneself, it just boom. And then it makes me think of zombie films too.
Yes.
I honestly think that the elitists, look at themselves as the survivors in those films. And they look at the rest of humanity as this soulless, empty zombie that's just walking around. And isn't it interesting how zombies eat people's brains? Right? I just, there's so much symbolism there. The brain, knowledge, that's where knowledge is kept, and you don't have any knowledge. You don't have any value. It's just eating it. To the zombie, it's just a source of sustenance and food. It's not really. There's nothing more to it. And if you shoot it in its head, the only way to kill it is to literally shoot it in the head or destroy its head. There is no other way to kill it. You could chop its arm off and it'll keep coming at you. It's about the mind. I think a lot of it has to do with the pineal gland and the third eye, and how, again, all being connected to this different level of self, and to understanding that everything is connected and that we're all connected to each other. See, that's one of the secrets of the universe that's been hidden from us. And this is stuff that I really, and this is not me just saying this is just because of all the research I've done over the years. I really believe that that's one of the ways that they've controlled us, humanity anyway, as so effectively. They've controlled humanity so effectively for so long because they understand this, and the general populace does not. And through entertainment and film and stuff, they really do manipulate people's minds. So with that in mind, I want to get on to the last subject here, but then I'm going to let you go, Jay, because I know you're a very busy man. 007 and James Bond. So your analysis of the Bond films, because again, I was a huge Bond fan, but even as a young child, I saw a lot of the, you have like secret government type stuff going on. You have these bankers. Interesting researcher named Al Neal has talked about Goldfinger. There are certain aspects where it's representative of them stealing the gold out of Fort Knox, like the Federal Reserve actually stealing the gold out of Fort Knox, right? Like, is there really gold in Fort Knox? How many times have people asked that, right? And I mean, that was just a thing that was asked. I think it was Ron Paul that was trying to get the Fort Knox audited at one point, or somebody was trying to get Fort Knox actually like an actual audit, a physical, visual audit of it, because nobody had seen the gold in years and years and years and years and years, right? Well, according to Al Neal, this basically when they were filming Goldfinger, they wanted the scene. They didn't want the idea that they were actually stealing the gold out of there, and that there was no physical gold in there. They didn't want that meme getting out into the general populace. They were actually worried about population actually thinking that there wasn't gold in Fort Knox.
So they changed. I know they altered it a little bit from the book to the actual film. And now supposedly, I don't know if this is true. Maybe you can shed some light on this. I'll shut up after I say this. But supposedly, Ian Fleming was arguing with Hollywood filmmakers about this point, about how he didn't want to change it. And then I believe he had a heart attack. And he passed away, or he had some sort of I'll say it was a heart attack or a medical issue or whatever, and then he passed away at the time of filming Goldfinger, and they were worried basically because of this, the general populace getting this idea put in their head that there wasn't any physical gold inside of Fort Knox. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but this is according to a researcher who he's spoken at the Prophecy Club, and he's into he's exposed to occult stuff and mind control and a lot of symbolism stuff, especially in commercials and stuff like that. But I wasn't sure if you were ever aware of that story or not when it came to James Bond.
No, actually, that's funny. I hadn't heard that one, but I have heard other theories about why Ian Fleming died when he did. So there's a lot of those kind of things floating around, and obviously with Kubrick as well. So. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. Ian Fleming is an interesting character. I don't. It's hard to say. I tend to take him as this sort of an older world conservative, and he comes from a sort of a prominent banking family, and he ran with a lot of the elite. I don't think that necessarily means he was a bad guy in totality. I think he was a human, and so he had good and bad aspects to his persona. But I tend to think that most of the Bond stories were written. I mean, they're written in part as a way for him to make money, but they're also written as propaganda and psyops. And so I mean, the Goldfinger. There was already several Bond novels by the time of Goldfinger, so I don't think that they were really afraid of him saying something, because he had said quite a bit in previous Bond novels. And if you look at the way the Bond novels work, they tend to use projection, and by that it's the kind of things that British intelligence is doing. They're just projecting it onto the Russians. So it works to create, the same way movies do this now, right? If you watch, the last Jack Ryan movie, they were supposed to think that there's all these Russian terrorists that are going to attack the stock market. I mean, come on, give me a break, right? But that's like a obvious example of propaganda. In the same way, I don't think Ian Fleming was saying anything too dangerous. I mean, maybe, I don't know, but I don't think he was saying anything so dangerous as to get his life threatened. Although Goldfinger is presented as a Jew, his name is Auric Goldfinger, and he does have Jewish characteristics. And some people would say, well, that's supposed to, that make Ian Fleming anti-Semitic. Well, no, he seems to be a equal opportunity offender when it comes to villains. So you've got Dr. No is half Chinese, half German. You've got Le Chiffre is French, I suppose. You've got Mr. Big, who is more something akin to Papa Doc Duvalier or something like this. So you've got all the races sort of represented as villains. Hugo Drax, is Caucasian German villain. So I don't think he was specifically trying to be intentionally anti-Semitic or anti-Chinese or German or whatever. I think he was just painting a picture of villainy being multiracial. But he works for the British establishment, so he's not going to present the British establishment as particularly nefarious. But what's interesting about the Bond stories in either their novel incarnations or film incarnations is that if you can filter out the projection aspects, you do get a very insightful picture into how the world works, right? I mean, we mentioned Quantum of Solace is, as I said earlier in the first hour, is not a well, the way the movie is, it's not actually an Ian Fleming story, although technically he did write a short story called Quantum of Solace, but it's not at all like that movie. But if you took that movie as an example, it reveals a whole lot. On Her Majesty's Secret Service reveals a whole lot. Any one of them does reveal some angle on some real thing out there in the world. The Man with the Golden Gun. This kind of. Now, if you watch if you read the book, it's not as exciting, but the film incarnation is about directed energy weapons. So it's really weird stuff. And by the way, that's got Christopher Lee as the villain. So we've come full circle here with Christopher Lee. But so, like, take Smersh, for example, the original evil cabal. Well, Smersh was a real Russian counterintelligence operation. It's a Russian phrase for death to all spies and so forth. And then Smersh evolves into Spectre. And what is Spectre? Well, Spectre is an international terrorist organization. So even in the Bond novels, you have Fleming sort of predicting and telling you, presaging how the world is going to transition out of the Cold War dialectic of Soviets and into international, quote, terror, right, with his use of Spectre. So I've always found that fascinating, and you'll notice even in the old stories, Casino Royale, you'll notice things like false flags. I think there's a bombing that's done, and they organize it as a false flag, if I recall, relating to Vesper Lind. So yeah, I mean, there's just so many different angles and nooks and crannies that you can take on these. If you want to look at the occult esoteric aspects, you could look at Live or Let Die, where you have a connection between voodoo and black markets with the gold market. That's actually what Live and Let Die is about. I mean, again, just depends on which way you want to go with it.
I already knew, like I said, there was already things questionable, but over the years, as I started to go back and watch these Bond films again, understanding things a little bit deeper, it's really right in your face. A lot of the stuff that they talk about, you're like, holy crap, are they actually showing that? Like you talked about directed energy weapons. You're like, wait, did they actually just show that?
Well, in the real world, if we wanted to just translate this into reality, James Bond works for Spectre. That's how it really works.
Pretty much.
Cobra works for G.I. Joe in the real world.
We've stepped through the looking glass, right? So what's down is up, what's up is down. Look, the Federal Jack logo goes back like 10 years now. We found the shadowy character, this Uncle Sam character. I call him Uncle Jack. I modified it, and I put like mesmerizing eyes on him. Basically, it's the left and the right are controlled by the same thing. Well, it's the same thing that we have here in reality. You have, like you said, James Bond works for Spectre.
Well, if you watch Quantum of Solace, and again, I'm not just rehashing this one because it's that great, but it does reveal the most in terms of the reboots. The bad guy, the villain, Mr. Green, he explicitly says to Bond, you should know something about the people that I work with. We deal with the left or the right, with dictators or liberators. And that's exactly how the real world works with intelligence agencies and multinational corporations and giant banking entities. Right? I mean, that's how things happen.
Totally agreed, 150%. Now let me ask you this: why is it, in your opinion, after watching all these movies, TV shows, everything you've watched and analyzed, and all the research you've done over the years, why is it that there are certain stories, or certain themes, certain basic themes of stories, like The Man Who Would Be King, we were talking about earlier, how it's been retold like 3 or 4 different times, whether it was in cartoons or it was in another version of a film? Do you find that, not just with that, but do you find that going on with many other films? And if so, what's your analysis as to why they keep retelling certain stories?
Well, the most simple explanation for that is just simply because there are a limited number of archetypal stories. And if you study literary theory with, say, the famous literary theorist Northrop Frye, he's written a famous book on literary criticism where he talks about archetypes. And Frye says you've got, basically a few sets of those. And there's not really a whole lot of deviation in those. You mainly have to just sort of move in and out different characters within those archetypal stories. And so you've got hero's quest, or you've got that kind of stuff, coming of age stories, genres. I mean, there's different versions of a lot of the same starting points or patterns. So the Man Who Would Be King type story, this is Wizard of Oz, this is Man Who Would Be King, this is Zardoz, this is a, this could be The Emperor Has No Clothes or something. You know what I mean? So on one level, it's just the limitations that we have as finite beings and our traditional stories. If you study literature, you'll learn these Greek terms like katabasis, which is the descent into the underworld. Well, this is a story that pops up all the time. This is book 6 of the Homer's Iliad. Also, I think book 6 of the Aeneid. Jesus has his descent into the underworld according to Ephesians. So these are archetypal tales and stories. So I would say that's probably the main reason why they're continually retold in some fashion. They're popular, so popular things get regurgitated, especially in Hollywood. I mean, look at all these remakes. Like, they don't do anything except remake movies, like, from the 80s and stuff now. You do like Ghostbusters, but you gotta have all women now, right? So it's PC or something. But and you could also have a retelling of something, or the usage of something through repetition, for conditioning or mind control too. Sure, certainly that could be an aspect of it.
I think it's probably a mixture of both. They definitely rely on archetypes for everything. So in many different ways. So yeah, I would say it's probably a mixture of both.
Well, if you watch, say, "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" that's the retelling of Homer as well, because you've got the black guy at the beginning is the old sage character. John Goodman character is like the giant, from the Odyssey. The girls are singing at the river in "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" That's the sirens. The sirens from the Odyssey. So that's just another example of that repackaging of the old myth.
Another movie I thought was just a crappy movie. Now that you're saying that, I'm going to have to go back and watch it now again after listening to what you just said.
Yeah, that's what the Coen brothers based.
I actually have this antiquated, probably 80, 90-year-old copy of the Odyssey on my bookshelf. I'm a huge book nerd. I didn't know that movie was a retelling of that story. Wow. And I just thought it was a weird movie. That was like out of nowhere, too. Like, all of a sudden, Clooney just comes out with this weird musical.
Yeah. Tiresias, the sage, I think Tiresias, at the beginning of the movie, the old black guy who's on that push cart that is blind, the old blind black guy, that's Tiresias from Greek mythology.
What a weird way to re-represent it, though.
I think it's funny. I've always thought it was a pretty good movie. I think a lot of the Coen brothers movies are pretty good.
I have to go back and watch that movie. That movie just never sat. I don't know. I wasn't really a big fan of it. But again, that goes back to, usually if it's something that the general public really wasn't into, or that you might not have, as the listener who's listening, you might not have originally liked it. Understanding, go read Jay's book, then go back and watch these movies again, and you'll be like, "What? Oh my God!" You'll start again. It's like putting on the Hoffman sunglasses from They Live and looking at things all over again in a complete different light. So, do you find that the same actors keep popping up in some of these same roles, pushing these same archetypal themes?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that could be for various reasons. I mean, Jake Gyllenhaal's always kind of playing this Donnie Darko style character. So is that just because he solidified himself as Donnie Darko in everybody's mind, or is it a deeper esoteric meaning? Could be. Is it synchronicity? Could be. Is it just casting directors, saw this guy in this role and I thought, oh, he'd be good in a kind of repeat of that role? Probably all the above. You've got like some actresses playing witches all the time.
You got to wonder.
Does that mean they're? I don't know.
Yeah,
but,
no. I think,
mean, in the case of some people, like Jennifer Garner is always playing a spy, and she actually did work for the CIA in PR. That's confirmed. So, does that mean she's a spy?
Wouldn't
maybe.
technically
Ben Affleck talks about Hollywood being full of spies.
Technically, wouldn't her playing a super spy badass be doing PR for the CIA?
It does, but then she literally goes and does PR for the CIA after that, after Alias.
Wow. Yeah. You see, it's all interwoven. Hollywood is literally there's occulted stuff in Hollywood, not just the symbolism, but in Hollywood itself. I mean, Hollywood is Hollywood. That's what they use to. It's actually the wooden rod that they used as a wand to cast spells. Hollywood, it's the wood that was used to make the wand, and literally Hollywood casts a spell on society, on the and the world over, because our movies are exported the world over, and that quote unquote American society is pushed forward. I almost want to call it Rome 2.0 at this point, because that's pretty much what they're doing. It's funny that you brought up the PNAC document too, because I mean it does. That's part of that thing that they talked about. That's kind of what they wanted to have, is like Rome 2.0, and we kind of do live not just militarily, but I mean with everything. It's kind of weird, and you could look at it so many different ways and what their beliefs are, but our reality is we kind of do live in this modern day weird version of Rome 2.0, where a lot of these same stories that maybe some of the Romans were told by people that were standing in a square, now we don't have the guy standing in the square. It's all done via movie screen or our smartphone. It still has the same effect, though. It still has the same effect of controlling us. And it doesn't matter if it's a story that's retold 100 times and it goes back, hundreds and hundreds or thousands of years. I think reading your book will help people have a deeper understanding of how all of this is connected, Jay. Because once they read the book and they have this level that you've written, okay, here's the entertainment industry as you know it today. Here's a lot of this occulted symbolism and what it means, and here's my research on it. Go do your own research on it, and they will each, then they'll come upon all of this deeper stuff that you and I have been discussing tonight. And, that's the only way they'll actually realize it for themselves in their own brains, is to do the research. And ladies and gentlemen, that's why I do these shows, and I always urge you guys, don't believe anything I tell you just because I said it or my guests say it. First of all, my guests that I have on are always very knowledgeable. Jay wouldn't be on here if he wasn't Jay. Okay, if he wasn't himself, and that's a huge compliment to you, Jay. Your work and just the way you do things, I totally appreciate the way you do things, 100%. And that's why I promote work like people like you, because you're making a difference with what your work is making a difference. So even if I have Jay on and I tell you his stuff is great, go get his book, it doesn't mean I want you to believe everything he says. I want you to go do the research yourself. I want you to I challenge you to try to prove him wrong. Try to prove me wrong. Please do so. It'd be great if Jay called me up and, hey, Popeye, you know what? We were wrong. Somebody, here's the exact evidence. We were all wrong. Oops.
Well, I've been corrected many times, and I don't mind being corrected. I think anybody who, if you're an adult, you got to be able to be corrected. It's not that big of a deal. It's not
Agreed.
It's not like we're all infallible or something like that. I mean, that's ridiculous. For example, that I've got to make a little note in the next printing of the book. I mentioned the CNN Gulf War broadcast with Charles Jaco and somebody corrected me on that, and I was incorrect. And so in the book, I said that it used a blue screen or green screen. Actually, but now I'm not totally wrong, because they are faking the attack, but they are actually in Saudi Arabia. So they weren't on a blue screen. They were actually in front of the hotel in Saudi Arabia, but they were faking that they were getting attacked and that there was a Scud missile. So half right, half wrong. And yes, I'm fine with being corrected and changing that footnote to not say that it was a blue screen. However, they were completely hamming it up, and it was still fake news.
Oh, it's the worst acting you could have ever seen.
Yeah.
Even if you take away the whole blue screen thing, right? It's the worst acting you've ever seen. And the Scud missile?
Exactly. It's totally fake. Now, and again, if your toenail is slightly askance, you're going to get people emailing you and commenting, and you're going to know. There's the internet will let you know when you've got something wrong.
Yeah, and
and I don't mind that. I don't mind being corrected.
Yeah, and there's not. I'm gonna just throw this out there. Over the years, as I've researched things, my personal opinion on things has changed, and no matter what different type of rabbit hole I looked into, the deeper I've researched things, the more nuanced you understand things are, and you understand how they all work together. And it doesn't mean that conspiracies don't happen. I understand all of that stuff actually does happen, but it's much deeper than what you see usually at face value. And to understand why things are done or how everything works together, you have to kind of take a step back and research one. You could research multiple aspects, but I really think it's good to focus on one thing at a time and do in-depth research on it. I can't push doing your own personal research enough to people, for real. A lot of people, again, they'll watch a YouTube video, they'll hear this epic broadcast, and I'm gonna end up even taking chunks of it and putting it out in shorter versions too. It's gonna be in full length, and then I'm gonna put out small pieces of some of the stuff that we talked about as well. And I'm sure people will see it, and years from now somebody will see it and maybe go and do a YouTube channel and be like, I heard an interview where this guy talked about, and oh my God, it's the truth. No. I want you to go do your research into it so that when you do finally choose to start talking to people about it, and somebody tries to debate you with misinformation that they've been programmed with, not that they're an agent, but just we're biological computers, right? You can then turn around and say, no. Let me point out this, information logically and rationally. And that's the other thing. People in this country, the world over, but especially in the United States right now, need to learn how to debate rationally without screaming at one another. Because civil debate seems to have gone out the window. Of course, that goes to education and everything else. That's a whole different broadcast. Anyway, really, you could get so lost in any one of these rabbit holes, so to speak, that you could spend months researching it, and I urge you to, but it's not, the further you research this stuff, you will definitely see that it's more, I guess the only way to put it, like I said, it's more nuanced than it seems at face value. That's the best way to put it, and there's just more to it. If you're going to go out and you're going to engage in this and educate yourself in it, then I urge you to at least take the time to do the in-depth research. And you can start with Jay's book. Now, Jay, not only do you have an amazing book, but your website is a plethora of information. I know your YouTube channel is as well. I want you to take all the time you need to shamelessly plug everything, anything. So Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, your website, and anything else you want to throw out there.
Yeah, if you just go to jaysanalysis.com, which is the site, you'll see the links on there for following me on Facebook or Twitter, and you can message me or email me to get the book. And it's $30 to get it direct from me, signed copy inside the U.S. If you're outside the U.S., you can still get a signed copy, but it does tend to go up depending upon where you're located and what those rates are. So I can't promise you an exact rate if you're outside the U.S. And I would say go ahead and try to get the book if you can, because we're going to have to do a second printing because the first batch is already pretty much sold out. So I have the last 100 or so copies of the first printing. If you want to follow my work, you can follow me through email at Jay's Analysis, and I tend to write or post audios either daily or every few days. And I do weekly podcasts and lectures and videos and interviews, and you can subscribe to those for $4.95 a month or for $60 a year. And that's pretty much what I do every day. So you can also access the archives and lose yourself in those. There's hundreds and hundreds of articles that probably 90% are from me, and then 10% from buddies of mine and so forth. So a lot of content there, a lot of education that you can get there for. I mean, people bitch about, why do you have this subscription site with well, I mean, like 90% of the stuff is free, dude. So, you could just spend all day listening to audios and reading for free. And I don't think that I charge any sort of exorbitant amount for what I do and trying to make a living from that. So if you want to, you can help me out and subscribe and get the book.
I'll tell you why you have to charge for things, because stuff is expensive, and if you want people like Jay or others to be able to compete with the mainstream media liars and be able to get the truth out there and some factual, intellectual analysis on things.
Isn't it funny how people only tend to bitch about people in independent media that ask for money or charge for things? Like nobody assumes that like Kroger is going to give them free groceries, or that like MSNBC shouldn't have ads or something. Like it's like, oh, it should all be free for me, from some independent source. Which again, nobody holds. I mean, are people mad at Zuckerberg because Facebook has ads? I mean, come on.
Well, it sucks. It's just a fact of the way things run right now. If we're to be able to compete in the system, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And I mean, I don't like. I've never run ads on Federal Jack, and I don't monetize my YouTube or anything like that. And I've fought against that, but that's because I have people that have helped me over the years, like the guys that founded Federal Jack and gave me the site not long after they founded it. They gave me the reins to it and were like, here, just do what you want with it. Because I actually was just giving them too much stuff to post on a daily basis, and they were like, can you just take over, because you're like overwhelming us. And that's how I started like doing this like 10 years ago with that website. But that stuff costs money. If I didn't have those guys on the back end being they're willing to pay for the bandwidth for my site, and all of my audio archives I give away for free, right? But they're stored there on that site. So if I didn't have my friends doing that, because like they don't have the time that they used to get involved in activism like they used to, so their way of like getting involved is to help pay for that so people can listen to my radio show for free. I think that's a huge big deal. A lot of people don't realize like that's effort in and of itself, because I mean it's not just throwing money at the situation, but if someone really does not have the time to help out, that is one way that they can help other activists out, and like by supporting them. So my friends help me by giving, taking care of the bandwidth and stuff for my website and for all my archives to be hosted, for everybody to download the audio and stuff for free, right? Or listen via the players on the website. I mean, I know we have our YouTube channel, but still, the website itself, all that stuff, we give it away for free. Well, I'm able to do that because I have people that help me, but not everybody has somebody, a group of guys, of hackers that are willing to, help pay for their bandwidth. And if I didn't have them, I wouldn't be able to do all of that. That's the honest truth. If I didn't have my team, if I didn't have my crew, my true friends, then I wouldn't be able to do and bring my knowledge forth to everybody. And Jay is no different. If he doesn't have you people supporting him, the listener, getting his book, paying attention, subscribing to his stuff, it's not that expensive. Trust me, I would rather pay for a subscription to Jay's Analysis. And this is not a pay. Jay doesn't pay me, okay? But I would rather pay for a subscription to his service and his website than pay for,
content to HBO or Showtime or any. I mean, if you want to, if you're going to analyze stuff like Jay does, then maybe you need to have subscriptions to that crap. But I mean, you pay for that. I mean, how much do people pay for cable a month? They pay like $120 a month, and I have 300 channels. You'll get more information out of Jay's stuff and out of his website and his YouTube channel than you're going to from somewhere else. And again, I know it kind of sounds like an infomercial, but it's not. I mean, seriously, Jay didn't pay me to say any of this. He didn't send me anything for free. Hey, Popeye, do me a favor. Here's $50 worth of free swag. Do me a favor and please have me on your show. There was none of that. I reached out to him. I respect his work, and his work stands for itself. It doesn't, you know what I mean? It doesn't need me to blow it up. I'm telling you to help him because I wholeheartedly believe in his information. I understand what it takes to run. It's not cheap to get bandwidth. I mean, if you want like 50 people to be able to go to Jay's site at once, then sure, he can get a regular cheap website plan. Otherwise, you got to pay for a decent amount of bandwidth for people to be able to listen to shows, watch videos, read articles. That's not cheap, unfortunately. And now I'm sure with the fake news meme going around, it's probably going to be even more expensive and more of a pain in the ass, depending on who your hosting company is. I wonder if these. Did you see the thing that Google and Facebook and Twitter and all that they're going to start embedding content with its own tag that they all share, a hashtag of some sort, or a hash mark, whatever they call it, of some sort. That way, they can decide if, like, say you uploaded say you do a podcast and you put it up on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, and YouTube hashtags it as like, fake news or whatever, then Twitter and Facebook can decide whether or not it'll go on their list as fake news, and they can decide whether or not they block it, they let it show up in feeds, or whether or not they filter it out of feeds. So, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that kind of crap going on, go subscribe to Jay stuff. Subscribe to anybody that you like in support in the alternative media. If you actually believe in their work and you're, then help them.
That's like the same principle of supporting a local business as opposed to Walmart or something.
Yes, exactly. You're the local hardware store as opposed to Home Depot. And you have all the same stuff, and it's actually probably $1 or $2 cheaper, and you're friendlier service. So go local, buy local. Go to Jay'sAnalysis.com, ladies and gentlemen. I like that. I like that. That's very good. I'm going to have to steal that, actually. I'm going to keep that and put that in my little bag of tricks there, because that's true. I honestly believe it's not just with anyone in particular. If they're actually doing good work and you believe in them, whatever individual helps you, then buy local. Best way to put it. Buy local. Stop supporting CNN or MSNBC or, I mean, again, Disney, ABC. Yeah, Pirates of the Caribbean, real news, not going to happen. Sorry, it's just not going to happen. End of story. So with that, I wanted to throw one more thing out to you, Jay, really quick before I forget this, because I have this written down. We were talking about Dune earlier, and it's interesting. There's so much stuff that's in Dune, but there's one little gem that I found in there, and I've kept over the years, and that's the litany against fear. And it's this little saying that they had in there, and it's interesting because it's almost like he was giving you the key to a degree to how to start solving these problems, is to not live in this fear frequency, not live in fear, because that's what you brought up earlier. They constantly pump that across in a lot of film, a lot of TV, a lot of quote unquote entertainment, music. In one way or another, is fear, 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 fear. The news is. I mean, it used to be they would at least once in a while put a happy kitten or puppy story, and not anymore. If there's a puppy or a kitten, it's either been run over or shot by the police. So there's not even any happiness anymore in the news. It's constant. This constant drip of fear. I mean, that has a whole different side effect on your body physically and your psyche and everything, and how controllable and programmable you become because you stop thinking and you go into a state of survival, pretty much fight or flight. Yet in this tale, this story that has so much of this stuff that you're talking about in it, it's talking about so many different things. He has this little gem in the litany of fear hidden in there, and it's almost like he was hiding in that the key. It's like the proverbial needle in the haystack. It just made me think of that earlier, so I actually had to write that down.
Are you talking about when he says, "I will not fear, fear is a mind killer," with the gum jabbar and all that? Is that what you're talking about?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
It's literally like this, and if people don't know it, it'll go right past them, but it's literally fear is the mind killer, right? And it is. Primal fear of like sharks and stuff like that is obvious, that helps you, but you can't live in a primal state of fear like that. If you live in that 24/7, then, I mean, it's horrible physically for you, but you're not going to be, mentally well either, and you're very easily controlled. You're constantly afraid. And I just thought it was very powerful, that little gem, that little needle in the haystack that he hid in there. And I mean, some people know about the Litany Against Fear, but not many people do. When we were talking about Dune earlier and we were talking about fear, I was like, I have to write this down because I didn't want to interrupt you. And I was like, I have to get his take on this. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I thought that it was interesting that little key or gem was hidden in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think that, when you get exposed to a lot of this information, you kind of go through a psychological process. When it's new to you, it kind of freaks you out, and then you kind of get maybe distressed or depressed for a while, and then you kind of come out on the other side, and I think you're stronger for it. As Nietzsche says, what does not kill me makes me stronger. So absolutely. And once again, there's fiction, there's film showing you that the system exists on the basis of fear. And so getting over that is a big part of the system losing its power over you.
Exactly. Don't live in fear. A lot of people say to me, don't you worry about cameras watching you or this or that. No, because they're watching you. They're going to watch me. They're up on that pole right now currently watching, recording, whatever. When you're going down the street, all that's going to an electronic database. I can't physically stop that camera from doing what it's doing currently at that moment. And I'm not going to let the fear of that camera cause me to live inside of a box, because that's what they want. That's just one way. I'm not saying that's, that's just one visual example, but you can apply that to
one of the things
anything.
that the Stoic philosophers used to say is that there's no point in being fearful or fretting over something that is impossible for you to change. We're all going to die one day. So is it rational to fear death? What would fearing it doesn't, how does Jesus say it? Fearing doesn't add a day to your life or an hour to your life. So what's the point of that? Sweating stuff you can't change.
Right, and if you really, if you use logic, perhaps instead of living in fear, and you're in rational thought mode, and not, because when you're in fear, your body goes in fight or flight. So if you go, if you sway and the opposite of fear is love. So if you go back into that frequency, and you're thinking logically and rationally, and everything's normal again, and the blood is, as Bruce Lipton would say, is flowing to the viscera or the gut. You're thinking clearly again, and once that fear is put aside, you can use logic. And you can use your massive superhuman computer, the human brain, to solve problems. There's absolutely no reason to let fear control you. And I find that once in a while you'll find a little gem like that hidden in some of this stuff, like the Litany Against Fear. So, yeah, it's definitely fear. Fear is used to control us, and I like to, honestly, I've actually recited. I have the Litany Against Fear tattooed on me. I have it tattooed. I had my friend draw up this old pirate scroll, and I had him tattoo it on me years and years and years ago. Ironically, before I had ever gotten into analysis mode on any of this, and I had read Dune when I was younger. That always stuck out to me. Even before I was, before I knew I was aware, my subconscious was already picking up on things, I believe. And that always stuck with me. And it always stayed with me. And I always thought it was very powerful and poignant. Because if people actually listen to what's in the Litany Against Fear, it'll tell you that fear is the mind killer. It'll control your mind. And that's what they do with it. And that's why, again, through the media and stuff, it's pumped out and it's done to control you. And again, one of the ways of defying that control and breaking that control, and at least getting some semblance of control back for your own free thought, is to do some research for yourself. And one of the places, again, I would start is with my guest tonight, Jay Dyer.
at jaysanalysis.com, and his book, Esoteric Hollywood. Jay, I appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate you giving me and the listeners almost 3 hours of your time tonight. So, ladies and gentlemen, go get Jay's book.
Thanks for having me on, man. I definitely appreciate you having me on.
Jay, it's been an honor, sir. I'm going to have you back on sooner rather than later.
Okay, will do.
I'll talk to you soon. And that's it for this edition of DTRH, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure you go to PopeyeRadio.com. You can download all of the audio archives for free there. Go check out FederalJack.com. Plethora of ebooks, videos, audio, articles, archives. It's a research archive is basically what I turned it into. Federal Jack started off a long time ago, as I've always said, as a news website, and we were a news organization, and we ended up turning it into an archive site because there was just so much information. So we still pump new stuff out, and we put new information out, and I post new stuff on there. But we've kept all the old stuff on there as a way of keeping it as a research archive. So go check out federaljack.com, and again, check out PopeyeRadio.com. As always, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking the time to educate yourself and to tune in. I believe in all of you. I know all of you are superheroes. So go be the superheroes I know you all are. Go be the change. I love you, each and every one of you, and I believe in all of you. I'll catch y'all again soon. I'm out.